Release that which I by Ermo. Chapter 461, Respective Beliefs. It was the strangest group of people Renee Med had ever seen. A detailed map of Longsong stronghold was spread open on the square table in the lobby on the castle's first floor. 6 people surrounded the table, including commander of the 1st Army Iron Axe, police chief of Border Town Vader, the current leader of Raging Fire Crack, head of Security Bureau Nightingale, dark-haired Witch Ashes, and Earl of the Elk family himself. Renee never expected that he would need the help of rats one day, let alone cooperate with witches. My lords, there are about 7 or 8 different gangs in Stronghold, Crack said, bowing and smiling ingratiatingly. Sickle Gang, situated in the northern outer city, is the largest group with 500 to 600 members, but Nell Gang, in the inner city, is the most powerful. Nell consists mostly of escaped convicts and mercenaries and rarely accepts commoners as its members, and they have more than enough swords and armor, which is why they control the most lucrative area. The eastern city belongs to Dead Flesh Eaters and Vulture Gang, who sell slaves and Dreamland water through the harbor area through extremely cruel means. It's rumored that these 2 rat organizations are backed by the Wolf and Maple Leaf families, but when our Raging Fire totally defeated them a couple years ago, no great nobles stepped up to help them. He said with a tinge of pride. As for the western city, the gangs are much more complicated. Since they are all small gangs, I've only interacted with their leaders. They are. Information about gangs isn't important, so you don't have to go into details. The tall Majin man interrupted. I only want to know if you can take us into the lairs of these underground rats? Ahem, my lord, Crack nodded towards him. A common saying goes, the lairs of rats are riddled with caves and holes. I know the main gathering points of all the gangs, but I don't know every single one of their shelters, especially the hiding places in dried wells and basements, so I can only rely on leaders and cronies to find the specific spots. He's right about that. Renee sighed. If we went face to face with the rats, they wouldn't stand a chance, but it'll be much more difficult to clear them all out. We might have a chance of success if we launch a surprise attack, but now that the notice has been announced, the leaders will all hide away by the time we act. Hide? The dark-haired witch laughed. Unless they hide in Redwater City, if they'll have to stay in Stronghold, there's no way we won't find them here. Yes, you're right. Crack wiped the sweat off his forehead and didn't argue further. The witch named Ashes gave off a terrifying feeling of pressure. Renee had been in battle and fought demonic beasts and Hermes, so he knew what a true warrior should be like. But even soldiers in the Judgment Army, who had faced hundreds of battles, would falter in front of her. She didn't need to make some scary expression because even when she was simply standing, no one could dare to look into her eyes. There was no doubt that she had not only seen blood and slain enemies but also hovered between life and death. That was why she had such a menacing aura. His Highness has given us 3 days to prepare. When the first batch of rations is distributed, the army will begin from the western city gate and clean up the rat gangs in all the areas. Iron Axe said quietly, this mission is targeting only the organizers so that we can take down the Black Street as quickly as possible. But, will this really work? Renee couldn't help asking as Iron Axe walked towards the entrance of the lobby. No city has been able to get rid of the rats. As long as the citizens exist, so will they. Iron Axe turned around and glanced at him. Is that so? Border Town doesn't have any rats. Everyone left, and only Vader was left. Earl, has anyone applied to be a policeman yet? Not yet, but I heard from Petrov that dozens of people in the Second Army have signed up for it. Renee sat down slowly next to the table with Iron Axe's words still ringing in his ears. After a while, he whispered, are there really no rats in the town? If you mean the conventional Black Street organizations, then there aren't any. Vader shrugged. No man or woman has to worry about food or shelter, and everyone can find a suitable job. Even the salary from doing odd jobs is enough to feed themselves. Honestly, before I went to Border Town, I didn't believe that a place like that could exist in the Kingdom of Grey Castle either. Why? Renee couldn't help asking. I don't know, my lord, Vader splayed his hands. His Highness Roland is capable of things that are far beyond any other nobleman I have known. No need to call me Lord. René waved his hand. His Highness wants us to work together, so we can put our titles aside for now. Vader nodded and didn't protest. René admired Vader's frankness. Do you think the prince can really eliminate all the rats in Stronghold and purify the entire western region? I'm not sure either. Vader's answer surprised him. After all, I used to be a patrol leader and interacted with rats for many years. Their existence was like the shadows under the sun, so blunt force might not be that effective. His Highness once said that if he was dealing with a large city with millions of people, he might not be able to take care of everything. But if there were only 10,000 people, he might be able to get rid of these bottom-feeding scums. Basically, he plans to make people realize that it's too risky to become a rat and there are many other better options. Too risky? René ignored the statement about millions of people because even a city with 10,000 people was already unbelievable. This will take a pretty long time to achieve. That's right, targeting rats or crime can't be done in one day, Vader said and nodded. That's why His Highness Roland established the police force. I told you before that this organization is completely different from a patrol team. It was really different. They reported to the city hall rather than the noble and maintained order in an area rather than conspire with criminals. And most importantly, His Highness told me one more thing. What did he tell you? I actually had the same concerns as you do now, Vader said with a smile, but His Highness asked, so you won't try because it's hard? René Med felt a sense of realization rush into his heart. If he did not try because it was hard, he would not have been relentlessly pursuing his knighthood. Although he inherited the title of Earl and felt like he was straying from his desired life, as long as he could continue to fight for the people, he would be still following the path in his heart. Now, this path was becoming even wider. Now. I understand. He took a deep breath. I was just as shocked as you. Vader recalled. But I don't understand what His Highness said next. Did he say anything else? René asked excitedly. Vader said, stroking his chin. He said you'll feel incredibly fulfilled after drinking this bowl of chicken broth. But, what does it have to do with chicken broth? Chapter 462, The Determination. Joe fell ill. He was the second weakest in the group before Paper was kidnapped, and since then he had become the weakest. Joe was fine the night he came back from the square. But the next day, Snake-Tooth found him lying motionless on the hay, moaning vaguely and with bright red cheeks. He was infected by the cold plague, Sunflower said while touching Joe's head, and his head is burning hot. Will I die? Joe, squinting his eyes, asked softly. No one answered. The cold plague was an extremely stubborn disease, and once contracted, you can only rely on the body to resist the infection. However, people who were physically fit seldom suffered from the cold, those who were infected were generally weak, so very few patients could survive it. It was essentially a death sentence for rats. I'll go and look for Kanas, said Snake-Tooth, breaking the silence. What do you want him for? To beg him to give Joe more food. He stood up. I've heard that the chance of survival is greater if the patient is kept warm and adequately fed. He won't give you any food, Tiger Claw shook his head and said. We all know what kind of person he is. Exactly, you may even get beaten up by him, Sunflower said while gathering hay. Rats never feed any useless person. Joe isn't useless. Snake-Tooth retorted. He can read. Just a few words, and of what use is that to Kanas? He wants people who can steal and rob others. Snake-Tooth clenched his teeth, turned around and walked towards the manager's room in the endless lane. He had to try even if he would be beaten up by Kanas with a stick. Surprisingly, Kanas was not back yet. You're lucky. When he brought the message back to his companions, Tiger Claw grinned. Or we may have to take care of another one. Sunflower sighed. Each of us will give a portion of our bread to Joe later when it's time for the bread distribution so that he can eat more. However, Snake-Tooth did not feel lucky at all. He could feel something was not right. It'd only take half an hour to send the message to Bloody Hand. It's understandable that Bloody Hand didn't come back last night due to the discussion of countermeasures, but it's already noon, the discussion should have been finished by now. Furthermore, when his men opened the door, he took a peek and realized Connors and his lover were both missing. The gang started to distribute food not long after, and Snaketooth realized that it was distributed by Connors' confidant. What he received was nothing but half a slice of brown bread. After 4 days, Joe's condition was still deteriorating. He was yelling that he felt cold yesterday, but he couldn't speak a word today. His once pink cheeks started to turn pale and his breathing was getting weaker. "We've tried our best," Sunflower said languidly with her hand on her stomach. They had given half of their food to Joe in the past few days. If it was not for them, he might not have lived this long. Tiger Claw, who used to be very energetic, was starting to look feeble as well. Connors had not shown up these past few days. More than 100 rats gathered in the room and started to discuss this matter. But it was just a discussion, after all, they were still getting food as usual. However, it was especially noisy today. It was the day of free food distribution, as announced. "I'll go to the square." After a long contemplation, Snaketooth clenched his teeth and said, "We need to eat more than just bread. Joe might be able to last if I could get a bowl of hot oatmeal for him." "Are you crazy?" Sunflower stared at him and said, "Don't forget how Connors warned us. Do you really want to get stitches on your lips? That's if he knows I snuck out. We don't even know where Connors is now. What if the lord of the city is really going to attack them? But his men are still here. Do you think they'll let you off if they find out?" Sunflower looked at Tiger Claw. "Don't just stand there. Help me to talk him out of this." "I'll go with you," the latter said suddenly. "Both of you? This food distribution may have already been ruined. Or perhaps there's no food at all, and it's simply the nobles' act of disguising it. I suppose it shouldn't be considered disobeying Connors' warnings in this case?" Tiger Claw twitched his lips and said, "I'm strong, I can run there and back while carrying Joe on my back, and it won't take us too long. Connors isn't around now and his confidants are hiding in his room roasting themselves in front of the fire. No one will notice us." Sunflower hesitated. "You just stay here," Snaketooth said, "so you can cover for us in case anyone asks. Just say we have diarrhea and had to go to find a sheltered place to relieve ourselves. No worries. We won't need long to rush back from there." "Well, then," she looked around and said, "Hurry up." Snaketooth and Tiger Claw snuck out of the log cabin, running all the way down the alley. The elevated snow under their feet drenched their trousers. Even though the cold wind that blew into their face felt as sharp as a knife, it couldn't stop them. Panting while arriving at the square, they found that there were almost 1,000 people surrounding the podium. Oatmeal really was being distributed. Both of them ran over quickly, but were stopped by 2 guards in brown uniforms. "Walk slowly, no pushing, and no cutting in line, otherwise you'll be prohibited from receiving any free food." Snaketooth noticed that there was a wooden fence set up around the center of the podium. The crowd was moving along the fence in a line like a folded dragon. Guards armed with strange iron bars could be seen at every short interval. They looked like the defenders of order, because people were expelled from the line from time to time. "My friend is sick. Can you help us, please? I'm begging you." Snaketooth knelt down on the snowy ground. "He's been starving for days. He's in need of food urgently." Tiger Claw knelt down beside him. "What kind of illness?" "It's the cold plague." One of them reached out to Joe, who was unconscious, and said, "Leave him with me. Both of you get in line." He knows the way back, doesn't he?" the other guard said. "Even if he doesn't know, you can always come back here to look for him." While saying this, the guard walked away with Joe on his shoulders. "What should we do?" Both of them stared at each other. No one expected it to turn out like this. According to their plans, the other party would either be totally indifferent or let them bypass the fence to get the oatmeal in advance. "Let's go back first." Snaketooth decided after some short contemplation. What? Go back? Tiger Claw asked with surprise. No oatmeal? It'll take us at least half an hour to get there with this line. There might be trouble if we take too long, he nodded and said. We can sneak out again in the evening to bring Joe back. Tiger Claw looked at the oatmeal on the wooden table and said reluctantly, okay, then. There was something that Snaketooth kept to himself, since the announcement of the free food distribution had come true. Did it mean that the other two rumors would eventually pan out as well? He vaguely felt that an upheaval might be coming towards the Black Street. Back at the endless lane, both of them tiptoed into the house but were caught by surprise. Sunflower was hung in front of the entrance with both her hands tied behind her back, standing on a shaky wooden bench. Bruises could be seen on her face. All the while, Kanna's men were standing by her side, sneering at both of them. You, finally back with a well-fed stomach? Chapter 463, The Elimination of Bloody Hand Gang. Snaketooth's heart sank rapidly. Let go, fear seized his throat. He opened his mouth but could only rasp in a dull voice. You mean let go of her? All right. The man kicked the stool below Sunflower's feet, her body stiffened instantly. The rope dug into Sunflower's neck. She kicked her feet in panic, clenched and released her tied hands, but none of these helped. Tiger Claw rushed forward to help, but his head was struck from behind with a stick and he fell to the floor. If we hadn't been waiting for you, I'd have killed her earlier. One of Kanna's henchmen sneered. What a good excuse, diarrhea. You probably don't know, but we've had people watching you. He knows that mutts aren't disciplined. We knew we'd have to teach you a lesson to ensure you abide by the rules of the Bloody Hand Gang. It's my fault. Snaketooth knelt down. Please let her go. She never even stepped out of this room. This little B***tch lied to me, the henchman shrugged. She swore you were just looking for shelter from the wind. Even with her 2 teeth knocked out, she wouldn't change her story. Why would I want her alive? So she can get back at me? They want to kill us. Snaketooth came to the sudden realization. He struggled to raise his head, seeing that Sunflower's struggle was getting weaker and her body had begun to stiffen. He forced himself not to look at her, but instead paying attention to the dagger hanging at the waist of the man. He was only 6 steps away. If Snaketooth could rush up and get that dagger. Suddenly, the rope broke. Sunflower fell to the floor silently. What the hell? The henchman frowned, but before he could finish his words, a line of blood spouted from his neck, spraying the face of the closest rat. Snaketooth stared at the scene in front of him. Meanwhile, sounds of a fight came from the outer room. Stop. This is the Bloody Hand Gang's territory. Somebody broke in. Oh, my hand. Damn it. Come out and kill her. Monster. Help. Kanna's followers looked at each other and pulled out their weapons. Before they could escape, an apparition flew in and overthrew the 2 front men. Snaketooth then saw the attacker, a striking woman with black hair casually tied into a ponytail at the back of her head. She was wearing a long black gown and her eyes were golden. Snaketooth felt his blood freeze when she cast a glance at him. Drop your weapon, put your hands over your head and kneel down. If you want to live. The woman stuck out 3 fingers. I will count to 3. Anyone who doesn't follow my instruction will die. 3. There were only a few seconds of silence before someone shouted, God, such skills, she must be worth 100 gold royals. Everybody, let's move. Catch her and boss will definitely reward us well. Catch her alive. Never mind. You'd be better dead. She held up a giant, oddly shaped ornate sword and charged into the crowd. Snaketooth couldn't believe his eyes. The sword was made of cast iron, and whatever it touched shattered instantly. She moved at such a fast speed that her enemies' lime powder and crossbows were barely useful. The once effective hidden weapons couldn't hit the target now. The crowd could not escape from her, let alone fight back. Protect your friend, child, a voice came, but the source of the voice was nowhere to be seen. He swallowed his saliva and crawled to Sunflower's side in panic. He put his hand to her nostrils to feel her breath. She faintly exhaled warm air. She was still alive. Snaketooth felt like crying. The happiness of having survived overwhelmed him. What was written on the announcement was real. These people had been sent by the prince to eliminate organizers of the gang. Now they had hope. Bending over Sunflower, he burst into tears. As more soldiers in brown uniforms rushed into the room, the fight ended quickly. All the conscious rats were told to stand in a line and walk out of the room one by one. "My head aches," Tiger Claw complained with one hand rubbing his head. "The bump is so big. Be grateful you weren't beaten to death." Snaketooth glared at him with tears in his eyes. "What happened?" Sunflower massaged her neck, on which appeared a black line from the rope. "I thought I was dead for sure." "I'll tell you after we get out of here." Snaketooth shook his head. He was afraid if he spoke too much, he would burst into tears again. "Your turn." The guard at the door twisted Snaketooth's arms to his back. Snaketooth didn't resist, and he followed the guard outside. A woman in a white gown was standing in the yard, a paradox to the lethal goddess in black. Her face was covered by a hood, with only strands of curly blonde hair showing. "You may leave after answering the Lord's questions." "Yes," Snaketooth faithfully replied. He was in awe of this army's capabilities. "Have you committed murder?" Her voice was brisk and pleasing, as if it was from another world. "How about rape? Robbery?" Suddenly something struck his mind. She was the one who had warned him without showing herself. "None of those." "All right." She nodded. "Wait at the square for your dinner from His Highness." Snaketooth stopped after 2 steps. It took courage to ask, "Are you a witch?" "That's right." Snaketooth hadn't expected an answer, but to his surprise, the witch gave an upfront reply. "These are Kanaz's followers." Snaketooth continued to speak, biting his lip. "He hasn't been here for 4 days. He must be hiding somewhere with Bloody Hand. Bloody Hand is the real head of the gang. Never let him go. Don't worry. They can't escape." The woman smiled and said this with a tone of unquestionable confidence. "Do you mean His Highness sent witches to hunt for the head of rats?" Tiger Claw's eyes were wide in disbelief. "Not only witches but also many common men." Snaketooth told the bizarre story he had just witnessed. "What I've guessed is right. Witches are accepted in His Highness territory. They can appear in public without worries, and even fight with others." He paused, and then continued to speak with excitement. "If paper really was sent there, she must be living a fairly decent life." "Sounds like you want to go there and meet her," Sunflower said, twitching her mouth. "Witches are talented and it's difficult to see them. You might embarrass her if you go to see her." "Oh," Snaketooth was stunned for a moment. He knew what Sunflower said was true. He was only a rat. Even if he could survive the winter, his identity would remain the same. Paper must be living a whole different life now, totally out of his league. "Don't overthink it." Tiger Claw patted him on the shoulder. "Look, it's time to eat." Chapter 464, The Changes. Many people came for the second meal. Luckily, the 3 of them had arrived early and were able to secure a position at the front. When Snaketooth joined the queue, he realized why the fences were built around the wooden stage. There was a speaker chattering about the new policy. He would probably have to keep listening to him until he got his oatmeal. The crowd moved forward slowly. After waiting for half an hour, he finally reached the back of the wooden stage. "Give me your right hand," a guard said. Snaketooth followed the instruction, and the guard stamped the back of his hand. "Next." The wooden fence extended on both sides to encircle a large area, but the queuing still continued. Everyone was guided by a guard to take a wooden bowl, receive the oatmeal, go and eat on the side, and then return their bowl. It was hard to believe that ordinary civilians and rats could be this orderly. Snaketooth looked at the long queue behind him and felt that this whole thing was absurd. It was as if they were in a solemn ceremony instead of begging for charity. "What did he stamp on our hands?" Tiger Claw stuck his head out from behind. I can't wipe it off. It's probably meant to prevent us from joining the queue again after we finish our oatmeal, he said with a frown. Tall tents were set at the perimeter of the empty space, and he could see through the shadows that there were many busy people inside. Heavy wooden barrels were being moved to the long wooden table beside the fence, and it was obvious that the food had just been cooked. As he watched the steaming porridge flow into his bowl, his hands could not help but tremble. How long had it been since he had a hot meal? The oatmeal was watery and did not come with vegetables or condiments, but just the golden porridge and its overflowing aroma was enough to make him salivate. Compared with black bread, which contained stones and husks, the food in his bowl made him feel warm again. Tears were starting to collect in his eyes again. Snaketooth finished the oatmeal quickly despite how hot it was and licked the bowl clean. Although he wished he could go back and beg for another bowl, he finally dispelled the idea after he saw the surveillance guards. He put the wooden bowl into the designated pot and followed the crowd to exit the fenced area. There was another wooden stage at the exit, and the speaker was answering questions from the public enthusiastically. After eating some warm food, the howling wind did not seem as cold as before, and the three of them slowly followed the crowd to the wooden stage. You asked why His Royal Highness distributed the oatmeal? That's a good question, the man said excitedly. It's because His Highness is determined to eliminate the rats. Those who are menaced by rats and those who are forced to comply with the rats for food can be completely liberated and no longer subject to their threats. At the same time, he did this so that the families that don't have enough food storage can survive the harsh times. This is His Highness' benevolence. You said earlier that the oatmeal would only be provided till the end of Months of Demons, so what happens after that? Someone asked loudly. The scene suddenly quieted as the people eagerly awaited the answer. Snaketooth also listened attentively. It's simple. You can support yourselves, the speaker said with a smile. Support ourselves? But I don't know how to farm. Could you please explain, sir? Don't worry, let me explain to you slowly. He waved his hand. After the Months of Demons, Longsong Stronghold and Border Town will merge to form a new city, so the empty areas in between will require a lot of you to reclaim and reconstruct. Only hard work can create wealth, and only hard work can change destiny. You'll have a stable salary, and the money you earn will support you and your family. At the same time, His Highness promised that those who officially have a job will be accepted as citizens of the new city. His words stirred a wave in the crowd, and Snaketooth felt his heartbeat speed up. Yes, I know what you are thinking, said the speaker loudly. Many of you are rats, or citizens forced to become rats. It doesn't matter. You can work for a new life. You no longer have to live in the dark underground, and you don't have to worry about being sent to the gallows. You can rely on your own hands to earn legitimate rewards, whether it's food, clothing, or even shelter. Sir, do we only need to be willing to work? He smiled and nodded. In the future, His Highness will need more than 10,000 people, so, yes, as long as you are willing to work. Snaketooth suddenly understood something. During the next few days, the three of them went to the central square for oatmeal at noon every day. More and more citizens heard the news and came to the distributions, until they occupied almost half of the square. Of course, some people didn't go for the food. They just wanted to witness the end of the Black Street Rats. It looked like there was a festival going on in Stronghold every day. After the oatmeal was done being distributed at noon, there would be trials and executions on the other end of the square. As the woman in the white robe had said, none of the rats could escape their arrest. Snaketooth saw Kanas in one of the trials. His face was pale as he knelt and trembled on the scaffold, no longer domineering like before. Then, as the iron pipe roared, his head was smashed into pieces. Apart from Kanas, Snaketooth also heard the names of many other big figures among the rats. These included Bloodyhand, Ironcrow, Ripper. They had all been fierce kings in Black Street. Their appearances were not much better than Kanas. Every death of a rat king was met with warm cheers and chants of "Long live His Highness." On the fourth day, Snaketooth saw Joe, looking completely recovered. The four of them hugged each other excitedly. "Where have you been?" "I don't know," Joe shook his head. "My mind was obscured at the time. When I woke up I was lying in a tent, and my head didn't hurt anymore. I only ate and slept until the fever came down. There were quite a few patients like me in there, drinking oatmeal with dried meat. I ate so much the first time that I almost swallowed my tongue." "Is there such a good thing?" Tiger Claw stared and said, "Damn, I want to be infected with the cold plague." "Anyway, it's good you survived," Sunflower said gladly. After everyone was done catching up, Snaketooth suddenly said, "I want to look for a job after the months of demons. Perhaps those nobilities are just fooling us, and there'll be additional requirements," Tiger Claw said. When they recruited the new Second Army and police members, they asked for a fixed address and a clean record, which means no stealing. "So we aren't even in their consideration." Snaketooth shook his head and did not answer. The things in the bulletin were gradually becoming a reality, and he realized that the new city was possibly beyond his imagination. In these few yet long days, he had already felt a change. If the speaker was telling the truth, would he be able to stay in the new city? If he could get rid of his rat identity, would Paper feel less embarrassed if he saw her again? Chapter 465, Inner Peace and Disturbance. Wendy, Scroll, and Spear were sitting in the castle hall, enjoying the top-grade black tea that was imported from the City of Glow. Wendy took the whistling kettle off the pot hook in the fireplace and poured the boiled well water into a teacup. Watching the water surface gradually being dyed a transparent orange and sniffing the mellow aroma that came from the rising steam, she felt her whole body become lazy. After blowing on the cup to cool down the tea, she took a small sip. The initial taste was slightly bitter, but it slowly turned into a fresh and sweet taste that rejuvenated her lips and tongue. As the warm liquid flowed into her abdomen, she uncontrollably let out a satisfied groan. On the other side of the hall, Paper was still fiddling with the sigil of God's will. She had already mastered the skill of injecting magic power into the sigil, and was also able to accurately control the output of magic power. But no matter how she tried, she was only able to light up the first magic stone on the sigil. "Whenever I see her, I'll think of the days in the Witch Cooperation Association," Scroll said emotionally. "At that time, nobody thought that we would all be able to live a life like what we have today. If we were able to foresee the future, Kara wouldn't have persisted so stubbornly." Wendy placed her cup down. "It's good that in the future, our awakened sisters won't have to experience the same suffering as we did." As she spoke, she started laughing. "We're probably the last batch of witches who had to suffer. Also the oldest batch, which means we'll enjoy the least number of good days," Scroll added while placing her hand on her forehead. "Sounds like we got the worst lot. That's why you came back early today, just to enjoy a bit more leisure time." Wendy joked. "I left only after completing my duties." The latter shrugged her shoulders. "His Highness Roland is away and thus the amount of work is much less than usual. I'm somewhat not used to it." "Is that so?" Wendy raised her eyebrows. "When His Highness returns, I'll tell him what you said word for word." "Oh, then, for the next exam, I can't promise that you'll be able to understand every question. You two have such a great relationship." Spear giggled as she listened to the conversation. "Although I'm not young anymore, I've never enjoyed such a deep relationship with anyone. You two are among the most fortunate of the witches." "That goes without saying." "Not every witch has a powerful father," Scroll said, and drank a mouthful of tea before continuing, "and he would pass on everything he has to his daughter, even in the noble. Such people are rare. By the way, how's it going in the city hall?" Wendy looked towards Spear. "I've heard that you'll go there whenever you're free recently. There are many benefits of going." Spear exhaled deeply. "This the first time I've gained insight into a departmental management style that's so well-ordered and demarcated, yet allows the departments to work closely together. Instead of having the ministers of each department conduct their own employee recruitment and compensation, the City Hall takes care of it for them. This way, there's less difficulty in replacing employees, and also allows capable citizens to enter the civil service without hindrance. I've no idea how His Highness conceived this idea. She even had a very nice chat with Berev. Scroll jested. Ahem, he was simply consulting me about a few questions related to the laws of the noble, which I happen to have a good understanding of, Spear said, shaking her head. Also, the new laws laid down by His Highness are very unique, and may even be implemented in the fallen Dragon Ridge. I discussed this with Berev for a little longer. Oh? How are they unique? Such is the part regarding the definition of citizenship. Sister Wendy, when will I be able to light up the second magic stone? Paper had joined in unexpectedly and bawled as she held up the sigil of God's will. When you're a bit older. Wendy reached her hand out to the young girl. Come, let me give you a hug. Paper held on to Wendy's outstretched hand and climbed into her embrace. Wendy caressed Paper's head as she watched the other two witches discuss the new laws, and felt a sense of calm. It would be so good if this life could last forever. At this moment, a guard entered the hall. He first glanced around the room before walking up to the four witches with a slight hesitation. Something happened? Wendy recognized him. He was a personal guard of His Highness. Lady Wendy, someone has arrived from outside the castle, and she claims that her daughter has just been awakened as a witch, the guard said while making a salute. His Highness has specified that when he's not around, you'll be in charge of such issues. What? The three witches were shocked simultaneously. A new awakened witch? That's what the person said. Quick, take me to her, Wendy immediately responded. At the main gate of the castle, Wendy saw two citizens waiting in the cold wind. One of them seemed about 40 years old, her hair already turned half-white, and the wrinkles on her forehead were deep and long. She was wearing an old-fashioned coat and her stature was slightly hunched. The other person was much younger, about 17 or 18 years old, and she stood reservedly beside the elder woman. This Lady Wendy of the Witch Union. The guard introduced. Our greetings, Lady Wendy. The two citizens bowed respectfully. They claimed to be migrants from the Southern Territory and that they moved into an inner-city residential district half a month ago. I verified their identity cards and found no issue with the information they provided. You're the witch? Wendy looked towards the young woman and spoke in the tenderest voice she could. What's your name? Lady Wendy's asking you a question. The elder woman tugged on the younger one's sleeve. Summer, the latter murmured. You're her mother? Yes, indeed. Her father is still working at the furnace area, so I brought her over. The elder woman nodded repeatedly. Lady Wendy, may I ask if what His Highness stated on the bulletin is true, that witches are entitled to a wage of 1 gold royal every month? It's true indeed, but she has to be willing to join the witch union. Summer opened her mouth. She's willing, she's definitely willing to serve and dedicate everything to His Highness. The mother interrupted her daughter. Do we have to sign a contract? When will we receive the money? These words made Wendy frown uncontrollably. It was not hard to decipher from her tone that the mother not only treated her daughter as an object for sale, but also thought that the witch union was a place of pleasure for His Highness. Wendy held back her unhappiness and replied placidly, His Highness is currently handling some affairs in Longsong Stronghold, and I'm not sure when he'll be back. Furthermore, there'll be a few examinations and tests before she can join the union. You may leave your daughter to our care in the castle, and when His Highness returns, we'll arrange for you to sign the contract. No matter what, Summer was innocent, and thus Wendy did not want to impose her anger towards the ignorant mother onto her. Even though witches were already accepted by the majority of the town's inhabitants, the refugees who recently arrived in the western region still possessed a gross misunderstanding of them. I'll entrust her to you, Lady Wendy. The mother made a deep bow and then patted her daughter's head. Behave well and don't disappoint His Highness. Mom, Summer wanted to say something, but the elder woman had already turned and walked towards the exit ramp. Chapter 466, Reappearance. Summer, right? Don't worry. Wendy walked up to the young woman and held her hand. The witch union isn't what your family thinks, nor do you have to stay in the castle all the time. Really? Summer asked softly. Of course. Wendy smiled. We stay in the castle because we have nowhere else to go. Before His Highness took us in, we lived vagrant lives. Our families were either broken or perceived us as strangers. You're considered fortunate to have a family. She paused briefly. Let's go inside, the wind is strong here. Okay. The young woman lowered her head and followed Wendy into the castle. This the new awakened witch? Scroll was already waiting at the door. What's her name? Summer, Wendy replied, and then looked towards the guard. Can you help me inform Lady Agatha to return to the castle? Tell her that there's a new witch. She should be in the Riverside Chemical Lab right now. My pleasure to serve you, Lady Wendy. The guard bowed before he turned and exited. Indeed, when Nightingale and Sylvie aren't around, only Agatha is able to distinguish magic power by type and capacity. Scroll nodded in agreement. What's her ability? We don't know yet. Wendy then caressed the young girl's head and asked, How old are you? 18. Summer became nervous again in front of so many strangers. 18? Spear seemed surprised. Isn't that the age of adulthood? When did you realize that you were awakened as a witch? Scroll asked. Tell us your story in detail. Just 3 days ago, when I turned 18, Summer replied meekly. That day, my elder brother caught a fish for me as a gift, but it was taken away by my second sister, and only half of the tail was left for me in the end. At night, I hugged my quilt and cried. I then dreamt that the fish returned to my bowl. When I woke up, I discovered that the fish was indeed there, and I also had a new elder sister. A new elder sister, what does that mean? Wendy asked in astonishment. One was sitting at the table and eating fish, while the other one was paralyzed with fear on the floor. However, the former soon disappeared together with the fish. Summer recalled what happened. At that time, I could feel that those things that appeared had something to do with me. However, when I told my family about it, I was beaten up by my father and told not to scare my second sister. I really didn't scare her on purpose. Who would think that a dream could become real? That wasn't a dream. Wendy confirmed what the girl said. It was an awakening call. Magic power would gather inside a witch's body on the aforementioned day of awakening. During this process, a witch would not only be able to feel the weird changes inside her body, but also, for a majority of witches, they would be unable to restrain this strange magic power, causing them to use their newly gained ability involuntarily. Hence, apart from the extremely unbearable day of adulthood, the second highest cause of loss of witches was the day of awakening. The consequence of performing magical effects in front of normal people was obvious. However, Wendy had never heard of a case whereby the day of adulthood and day of awakening fell on the same day. Albeit this was no doubt possible, the day of adulthood was just a more special day of awakening. After that, my second sister called me a witch and said that I had to leave home. My elder brother retorted that there was no issue with me being a witch as there were many witches in the town. My family quarreled over this. Summer's voice became even softer as she spoke. In the end, they decided to send me here. It thus seemed that even people who had recently arrived from the Southern Territory were already being influenced by the town's propaganda. Fortunately for Summer, she was not tied up and handed over to the church, like many witches were. The unfortunate thing was that her family was ultimately unable to accept a witch. However, Wendy was confident that this kind of situation would be improved over time. The original inhabitants of Border Town were a good example. After Wendy inquired about a few more details from Summer, Agatha walked into the hall, looking worn out. Is this the newly discovered witch? Wendy nodded and recounted Summer's identity and awakening experience. How does the Union test a witch's ability? Agatha took a magic stone out of her waist pocket after she was done listening. It's usually divided into 2 sections. One is to observe a thorough performance of the ability, and the other is to use the stone of measuring to measure the aggregate level of the magic power. Then, she looked at Summer and instructed. Close your eyes and feel the magic power revolve inside your body. Does she need a partner to assist her? Wendy appeared anxious. She became a witch only 3 days ago. I'm afraid that she knows nothing about her magic power. No need. Agatha chuckled. I'm only worried that she's scared. As they spoke, the magic-filled stone emitted a ray of pale green light that enveloped Summer. A mist gradually appeared around her chest. Its center was pale yellow in color and it seemed like it could dissipate at any time. She wasn't lying. After observing briefly, Agatha stopped the operation of the stone of measuring. It's indeed a feature that only occurs when the day of awakening and the day of adulthood are on the same day. The type of ability is the summoning type, which you're all familiar with. The level of magic power is extremely low. Extremely low? Wendy winced. Did such a coincidence also occur in Tequila? The Union had witnessed the awakening of thousands of witches. Something like this was rather common. Agatha replied proudly. As for witches who awakened only near the end of adulthood, it was as if they never had a day of adulthood. What? Their magic powers were never able to develop and thus remained in the pre-adulthood form forever. Naturally, they didn't have the derivative skills and steady growth that were unique to adulthood. I don't know if such witches were able to have high awakenings, but if they were unable to develop, the problems with their magic power would bug them for the rest of their lives. She paused briefly. We should have a look at Summer's ability first. After all, magic capacity is only one aspect. The ability itself is the best way to gauge a witch's value. Agatha! Wendy exclaimed while frowning. Every witch should be treated as a fellow sister, instead of being valued based on her ability. This is how it's done in the Holy City. Agatha was unmoved. Sure. I believe His Highness saying that every ability has its own special use, but they're still distinguishable by their quality. What are you arguing about? Summer opened her eyes, looking confused. Nothing much. Wendy forcibly smiled and said in a comforting voice, try to demonstrate your ability to everyone. Yes, the young woman held her breath and slowly reached out her hands. Soon, the 4 people present were able to see the effects. They saw figures of themselves positioned on the other side of the hall. 2 of them seemed to be discussing something, but not a sound was heard. Suddenly, Paper, who had left the hall a long while ago, reappeared beside Wendy and slowly crawled into Wendy's arms, revealing a sweet smile on her face. Wendy subconsciously reached out a hand to the figure of herself, but her fingertips passed through the figure as if there was nothing there. Chapter 467, You're Irreplaceable. After the illusion disappeared, the lobby fell into an eerily silence. After a while, Scroll finally sighed and said, No wonder your sister fell over in shock. That's quite terrifying indeed. The ability to place an entire group under an illusion is very rare, but not new, Agatha said slowly. When I was in the Union, I knew at least 2 witches with similar powers, one of which was a senior witch from Starfall City. How many times can you use this ability every day? Asked Wendy. Can you control the specific time period that the illusion shows? According to His Highness' usual practices, there should be a comprehensive test of her ability that sought to understand its characteristics, efficacy, and usage. About 2 or 3 times, whispered Summer, and what do you mean by time period? Are you asking how recent the things I show are? Seeing Wendy nod, Summer stroked her own head in embarrassment. I've never tested it, but I think earlier things take more effort. Wendy couldn't help but laugh. It doesn't take effort, but the magic power inside your body. Magic power? You should be able to feel it flowing inside you like water, or floating inside you like fog. Using your ability requires magic power, explained Scroll. There are so many things to learn about magic power, and I'll teach them all to you in the future. Summer nodded. Then, Wendy instructed Summer to use all her powers to display an illusion. This time, the illusion was from a day and a half ago, when the lights were shining in the lobby, and the Sisters of the Witch Union were having dinner at a long table. Afterwards, Summer completely exhausted her magic power and lowered her arms, panting, with beads of sweat emerging on her forehead. Wendy recorded the results of the 2 tests on a notebook, but she couldn't think of a single use for Summer's ability. Her illusions can only show the past but can't predict the future, so we'll have to wait for His Highness Roland to return and judge. At this thought, she couldn't help but feel a little frustrated. His Highness once told her that he wanted to make the Witch Union a self-governing organization and to appoint her as the director. However, she wasn't as nearly knowledgeable as His Highness, so she couldn't think of all the uses for her sister's abilities as well as he could. After collecting her emotions, Wendy was about to say a few words of encouragement to Summer, when Scroll made a gesture towards her. The two witches stepped aside, and Wendy asked, "What's wrong? Were you planning on telling Summer that she could stay here if she didn't want to go home?" Scroll asked with a frown. "Did you forget that witches need to be verified before joining the Witch Union?" Wendy obviously knew that witches needed to answer 10 questions about their identity and background under the supervision of Nightingale before being accepted. But Summer probably didn't lie. Her identification was made by Soraya, and her background matches up. Not to mention that she just awakened and is a non-combat type witch, so even the church won't be able to predict something like this. Magic power isn't the only thing that can harm someone. A dagger or a pack of poison can have the same effect, if not better. No, how could she possibly? But you can't rule out this possibility. Scroll interrupted. The City Hall is in charge of resident verification and won't inspect every household, so a sudden awakening is actually the best way of getting into the castle. She paused. I know that this possibility is very small, but don't forget that we can't afford to lose His Highness Roland. Lady Tilly is also living in the Witch Building right now, so if something happens to her, the relationship between Border Town and Sleeping Island will completely splinter, and all of His Highness' work will be for nothing. It's too high of a risk. Wendy was silent. She knew that Scroll's concerns were reasonable and weren't targeting Summer, but she still found them hard to accept. As the first witch to be awakened in the town under the rule of Roland, Summer was treated as a potential enemy spy, which was simply heartbreaking. After a long time, Wendy said, "I understand. I'll send her back." "I'll go with you." Scroll sighed. After they left the castle, Summer instantly became much more energetic and began holding Wendy's hand and asking about the witches and the Lord. "What's wrong?" Wendy asked after answering all her questions. "Why are you so glad that you don't have to live in the castle?" Summer gulped and lowered her head in embarrassment. "I heard that the Lord, or His Highness, is a very scary person and ravages all the women around him every day." Pfft. Wendy almost choked in shock. "Where did you hear that from? Isn't he Prince Roland of the Kingdom of Grey Castle?" "I've heard this many times in Eagle City, and there are even folk songs that say the second prince is conniving, Prince Roland is lecherous, and only Princess Garcia of Port of Clearwater is a good ruler," whispered Summer. "I see," Scroll said with great interest. "This is probably Garcia's way of promoting herself. It's quite unique." "Is he not that kind of person?" Of course not," Wendy said, blushing. "You'll soon learn that he's the Lord who is worthy of the witch's trust." They came to the residential area where Summer's family lived, walked up to a 2-story house, and knocked on her door. Summer's mother answered the door. "Mom, I'm back," shouted Summer excitedly. "How did you?" She paused and stared at the two people behind her daughter with a panicked look. "Did she do something wrong? Why don't you want her?" "His Highness hasn't returned yet, so she can stay in the castle and wait for His Highness to return," said Summer's mother impatiently. "Summer is very obedient. She might be a little slow, but she'll do anything you ask her to do." "Ma'am, the Witch Union isn't what you think it." Wendy felt anger rushing into her heart, but Scroll interrupted her before she could finish her sentence. Scroll took out 1 gold royal and waved it in front of the woman. "Your daughter is indeed a witch, so we'll sign the contract when His Highness returns. Here's your compensation for the first month." "Yes, yes." The woman's attention immediately moved on the shiny coin. "Thank you, my lady. Remember, you're now taking care of her on behalf of His Highness. Understand?" "Yes, my lady, I'll take good care of Summer." After they left the house, Wendy couldn't contain her anger anymore. How could you pay such a terrible woman? Even if you were paying in advance, you should have paid Summer. Would Summer be able to keep the gold royal? Scroll's answer shocked Wendy. If she can't keep it for herself, the money will eventually fall into her family's hands. If she can, she'll be completely alienated by her family. That's why I gave the money directly to her mother, so Summer won't have to carry this burden, and it might help to raise her status in her family. She has so much time ahead of her. If we can use the gold royal to buy a better life for her, then it's a good deal. Wendy pondered for a while and said, "You're right. I was too naive." The consecutive setbacks greatly discouraged Wendy, and she began to think that she wasn't good enough to lead the Witch Union. However, no one cares about them more than you do, said Scroll with a smile, as if she had read her thoughts. After being in the Witch Cooperation Association led by Kara, I realized that a trustworthy leader would care about her witches wholeheartedly and always put their interests first, regardless of their abilities. That's exactly why you're irreplaceable. Chapter 468, The Return. After 2 weeks, Roland was finally on his way home. After clearing out the 4 noble families and Blackstreet rats with an iron hand, he could, for the time being, start the reform of Longsong's stronghold from scratch. Relief and resettlement measures were underway in an orderly fashion. Although the gold royals and provisions seized from the territories of the Maple Leaf, Wolf, and Wild Rose families weren't as abundant as the ones seized from Duke Ryan, they were still a shocking amount. That was why he could expand the relief program to the entire city unscrupulously, and successfully promote his policies during the porridge distribution. By the day of his departure, the Second Army had reached its target of recruiting 500 people, and the police department had newly added about 200 new members as well. Roland left half of his soldiers in Vader and Stronghold, so that they could not only manage defenses and maintain order, but could also train the new recruits into usable warriors. He knew the time for him to implement his policies was limited. If he failed to facilitate the direct communication between the people and the city hall and did not establish his authority among the masses quickly enough, the ancient power would return to fill the current power gap. As the saying goes, there could be no construction without destruction. He had already completed the destruction, and now it was time to construct and boom Stronghold. Roland's source of confidence was Border Town, whose population had grown to over 30,000 people, more than half of which were receiving elementary education. This would equal to the size of 2 modern-day middle schools, but it was a shocking number for this era. Furthermore, elementary education was not just about reading skills, but also included basic knowledge of science and politics, as well as a universal sense of patriotism. The increase in literacy rate would provide him with enough manpower for the revolution. Also, compared to ignorant and meek civilians, a sense of patriotism will enable them to burst out unimaginable power. The town's subjects were each small sparks that would one day set off a great fire in the entire land. As the sky dimmed, Roland saw the town looming against the darkness. "Look, what's that?" a member of the nobility shouted behind him. "A bridge?" said another person, craning his neck. "My goodness, it's way too long." "That's impossible. How could such a long bridge be supported with only 2 pillars?" "Wait, it seems to be made of steel." On the way back, apart from the witches, there were dozens of lower-level nobles on Roland's boat, who had not participated in the rebellion and therefore survived the cleanup. According to Roland's plan, those lower-level nobles would learn to hierarchically manage the city hall. After the city construction was officially underway, they would return to Stronghold and help Petrov build the secondary city hall to carry out and give him feedback on his orders. After the nobles lost their feudal privileges, they would all want to improve, and the only thing they could rely on was their own abilities. As the fleet passed the steel bridge, Roland heard the astonished gasps of the nobles behind him. Everyone held their breaths and stared as the steel bridge that stretched over the entire width of the river flitted over their heads. The prince couldn't help but laugh at these people, who had not stopped exclaiming since they boarded the boat. First, they were shocked that a boat made of stone could float on water, and then they were amazed by the spinning wheel and the puffing steam engine. "It's a shame that the town's 3 supplies project isn't completed," he thought, otherwise their jaws would drop to the floor when they saw the power of light bulbs. The boat slowly docked with a sharp whistle. Bariv, Carter, and a group of City Hall officials had received the carrier pigeon and were waiting by the shore. When they saw Roland, they set off celebration cannons and welcomed him with a set of formalities fit for a king. Roland smiled and patted the two men's shoulders, and then he brought Bariv over to the stronghold nobles and introduced everyone to each other. "You're in charge of these people's housing, lives, and education," he said quietly to Bariv. "Don't mind their identities and titles, since they are barons at most. There are all kinds of people in the mines, and they all have to work to live an honest living. Train them like you would do to new graduates. I want to see the results as soon as possible." "Yes, Your Highness." When Roland returned to the castle, all the witches who had heard about his return were waiting in the lobby. Before he could even feel the effects of the heating system on entering the door, a warm body leaped into his arms. He smelled the familiar scent of her hair and patted her head, smiling. "I'm back." "Uh-huh." Anna raised her head, her blue eyes sparkling with joy. "I've been waiting for you for a long time." "Me too." "And me." "Coo." Soon, Roland felt an extra weight on each of his arms. He didn't even have to look to know that it was Lightning and Maggie, because no one else would interrupt him and Anna. "Hey, you two basically went along with him," Mystery Moon complained. "Yeah." Lily scoffed. "No shame. I'm just glad you're all back safe and sound," said Wendy gently. "We should celebrate tonight," Scroll suggested. "Yay. I want ice cream bread," Andrea exclaimed. "With Ash's and Shavi's portions, I'll be feasting tonight." The last to walk up to him was Tilly Wimbledon. She stuck out her hand and said casually, "You've had a long journey." "Thank you." Roland smiled and grasped her extended hand. After a hearty dinner, Roland returned to his office and sighed heavily. Although the castle of Stronghold was much bigger, this small place was much more comfortable. Just as he was about to sort out the books he brought over from Stronghold, Anna entered the room. "You came just in time." Roland pointed to the books piled on the rug. "Look, these are my presents for you. They're mostly historical records and legendary tales, while others are secret stories of the Western region, and they were all taken from Duke Ryan's library." "Oh, right, this one is." Before he could finish, he felt a pair of soft lips press onto his. They brought a sweet scent mixed with passion and warm moisture. "I really missed you," Anna pronounced each word with due stress after she disengaged from Roland, looking deeply into his eyes. As he stared back at her, Roland felt a sense of warmth swarming upon his heart. "This book? I'll read it later." "Good idea." The two became entangled in a kiss. Chapter 469, Don't Make Her Wait Forever. The next day, Roland walked into his office humming and found that Wendy was already there waiting for him. "What's the matter?" He stepped over the messy pile of books on the floor and poured her a cup of tea. "Congratulations, there's a new witch in Border Town." She smiled and told him about everything that happened in the past few days. "If you need, I can summon Summer to the castle anytime. The first witch awakened in my territory. She's also the first witch recruited after my public recruitment notice." Roland's face was instantly lit up, but when he heard the second half of the sentence, he asked curiously, "Isn't she in the castle right now?" "No, because Nightingale wasn't there to verify her identity." Wendy repeated what Scroll insisted. "We sent her home and paid the first month's salary in advance." "That wasn't a bad idea." Roland nodded. "Tell her to come and sign the contract this afternoon." "Yes, my lord," responded Wendy, who was obviously dying to say something else. "What's the matter? Aren't you angry about people's opinions towards you and the Witch Union? Also," she paused for a while before saying through gritted teeth, "also, my ability might not be suitable for leading the Witch Union. Scroll is more experienced and mature than I am, so I think she should be in charge." "I'm sure you also brought this up to Scroll," asked Roland with great interest. "And then she told you that you were the best candidate?" "Huh? I guess I was right," he sighed. "And I feel the same way. Administration techniques and methods can be learned through experience, but personality is much harder to change. Haven't you realized that the most loved member of the witches, besides Maggie, is you? Also, Scroll is mostly in charge of the education department and will only be busier in the future, so she won't have much time to communicate with the new witches, which happens to be your strength. You should give yourself more credit. I'm an excellent judge of character. Before Wendy could answer, the prince continued, as for the misconceptions that civilians have towards the witch union, I really have overlooked them. I never thought that this body, no, my previous reputation would spread all over the kingdom. He pondered for a while. I must fix this rumor as quickly as possible. On top of further advertisement, I also think it's best for the organization to run independently. Run independently? Yes, I want to turn it into a department, just like the city hall. Roland had considered this issue before. There were only around a dozen witches in the union now, so he still could manage all of them. However, if it expanded to hundreds of members or were on a scale as big as the holy city of Tequila with thousands of witches in it, he obviously couldn't handle them all alone. They needed to establish a governing system that could operate independently and assign witches to different positions, and he would only serve to give suggestions based on their abilities and evolution. After he explained his thoughts to her, Wendy said hesitantly, but there are hundreds of people in City Hall, while there are only about a dozen sisters, and they all have their own issues to tend to. Also, how would this change the citizens' opinions toward us? Rumors are like fear because they both come from the unknown. The town residents can accept witches because they personally experience the benefits that Nana and Lily bring, Roland said with a smile. Allowing commoners to join the witch union will not only solve the issue of insufficient staff, but also help the people better understand this organization. Voluntary promotion through the people themselves will definitely help improve the people's impression of witches, and your work and contributions to the town will be well known by the public. Just like how academies of sciences didn't just hire scientists, a great number of commoners were required for daily errands, administrative duties, and research organization. If he wanted the witches to be accepted by all the people, he would need them to understand each other better, so placing witches and commoners in each other's lines of work made sense. I see. Wendy nodded. This is a pretty good idea. But how do we select these people? Since you'll be operating independently, you'll also have to do your own recruiting and screening. Roland stroked his chin. You can ask Countess Spear about this, because she should be pretty good at constructing an organization centered around witches. However, there are only a few members in the witch union, so you can start by hiring an assistant or staff member as practice. After the months of demons, I'll build a new building next to the city hall, which you can use as the base for the witch union. He didn't mention that since it was the witch union, they wouldn't only be in charge of the witches in Western Region or Kingdom of Grey Castle. If he could build the right infrastructure, the union would be able to immediately cooperate with the witch organizations of all the kingdoms he absorbed. I got it. Wendy inhaled deeply. If you have decided to give me this task, I'll try my best to carry it out. After Wendy left, Roland continued to organize the books from yesterday. Looking at the pages scattered all over the floor, he couldn't help thinking of last night's fiery and passionate kiss. Anna's fragrant hair, sparkling eyes, and soft body made him tingle with excitement. Although she once burned all of her clothes to the ground without any hesitation when she first met him, he had not been as tremulous as he was then. It was probably because she was still a helpless little girl back then, and now she was a strong and beautiful woman. In only a year, she had changed so much. Maybe I should take the initiative and respond to her. Roland's thoughts were interrupted when his hands touched someone else's finger, and he realized that Nightingale was handing a book to him. Let me help you. Roland paused with a start. Last night, when Anna followed him into his office and embraced him, he didn't notice if Nightingale had also followed them into the room from the banquet. Don't worry, I left immediately last night and didn't stick around to be the third wheel. Nightingale rolled her eyes. I guessed that after having not seen you for a long time, she would throw herself at you. She never represses her emotions. Is that so? With Nightingale's help, the books were quickly organized and put on the shelves, filling up each vacancy. All right, Roland stuffed the last book into a remaining vacancy on the shelves. Thank you. Alas. How long are you going to drag this on for? Don't make her wait forever. Roland paused and turned around. Nightingale had already disappeared, but her final words still echoed in his ears. Although her voice was very low, he was certain about what he heard. And don't make me wait forever either. Chapter 470, The New Warship. As Roland walked up to the path leading to the North Slope Mountain, Nightingale's remarks were still ringing in his ears. He was suddenly enlightened. That's right, he thought. I'm no longer just a regular man who only interacts with blueprints all day, and this is no longer the world I used to live in. Now, I'm a lord of a great territory, and I might become a king one day, so if my situation ever changes, I can't use my old approaches to hold myself back. I just have to follow my heart, he told himself. If I force anything because of some insignificant principles, it could only result in continuing to hurt Anna and Nightingale. At this thought, Roland felt a weight had been lifted off his heart. He inhaled deeply and pushed open the backyard door. Opening the steel door was just like opening his heart, and he instantly saw a whole new world. Oh! Here comes His Highness. Hummingbird and Lucia ran up to greet him. You're here. Anna smiled sweetly. Roland saw a faint red mark on her pale neck and couldn't help but recall the passionate scene last night. However, since he already made his decision, he didn't mind waiting a little bit more. Have you completed the model? Of course. Anna made a beckoning motion. When the two walked out of the yard, they saw a steel boat floating in the middle of a pond surrounded by snow. The steel boat was about 1 meter long and 20 centimeters wide, seeming much slimmer than those unwieldy concrete boats. The bow had a distinct thin point, its stern was flat, and the unique part of it was that the hull was covered with overlapping supporting bars as if it were pieced together with thousands of squares. This is exactly what I wanted, Roland exclaimed. Compared to the concrete boats that were poured into steel molds, the pure steel boat had a unique delicateness, and the overlapping bars made it look like a work of art. He knew that every piece of this model was cut with black fire according to shrunken proportions, without a single junction missing. If this model were brought to the modern world, it would be worth tens of thousands yuan. Is this the new kind of boat you want to build? Yes. Roland nodded. It's also the town's first regular warship. Originally, Roland planned to use the concrete boats as shallow water gunboats, but he realized that if the steam engines didn't provide enough power, the concrete boats would be too slow. Even when only carrying fuel and crew, the fleet's average speed during the journey to Longsong Stronghold was only 8 to 9 kilometers per hour. If the boats also had to carry 152mm Stronghold cannon, gunpowder, and other weapons, their speed could drop to as low as 5 kilometers. This was equivalent to even less than 3 knots per hour. This was due to the big dead weight of concrete, which wasn't an issue in simple supply transport, but it was an undesirable feature in warships. If the town was still suffering from a lack of steel like it was 2 months ago, Roland would have to put up with this flaw. However, with the production of Star of Steel, the current amount of steel inventory was enough to build a true steel-clad warship. Roland chose the simplest technique of module assembly, which meant soldering pieces of steel boards together with beams to form a large hollow unit, and then connecting these units together to form the hull bottom. This piecing method eliminated the traditional need for a keel, and since the enemy did not have any cannons, he did not worry about defense mechanisms. The sides of the hull were made almost entirely of thin steel plates, thus minimizing the cost and dead weight. As for the propulsion, Roland decided to use the propeller technology instead of a paddle wheel. The power still came from a steam engine that turned the 2 propellers by rotating gears. In the blueprint he gave Anna, he also left room for it to be remodeled as a triple expansion steam engine since he planned to invent a new type of steam engine more suited for boats when he began mass-producing the steel boats. When they returned to the backyard, Anna began to cut the first steel plate. The black fire in her hand acted like a precise ruler that instantly sliced a thick steel block into 7 thin plates, each exactly 5 millimeters thick. Next came the soldering. Hummingbird reduced the weights of the steel beams and placed them between 2 plates, and Anna's black fire turned into an extremely thin and hot line and sewed the three components together like thread. This was completely different from her original soldering technique, because her black fire heated the steel from the inside, allowing the liquid steel to completely fill all crevices. After the three were completely combined, the beam was lowered by about a millimeter, which meant that its bottom had completely filled the space between the two plates. A cross made by steel beams could connect 4 plates, and more crosses could form a hollow box unit. These units were lightened by Hummingbird and transported to the Redwater River, where they were assembled together at the dock. Meanwhile, Roland's eyes never left Anna's busy figure. Her flaxen hair swayed with her cutting motions like a spirit dancing in the pure white snow. In the afternoon, Roland met Summer, the newly awakened witch. Since she was in his office, it meant that she had passed Nightingale's verification. Wendy had already clearly recorded her ability, so Roland need not perform any more tests but immediately placed the contract in front of her. Summer held the pen awkwardly for a while before saying with a red face, "I can't write." "That's all right." Roland smiled. "You can also sign with your fingerprint." She carefully pressed her inked thumb onto the parchment. "Is that all?" "Yes." Roland rolled up the contract. "Wendy has told me every detail about your situation, so even though you signed the contract, you don't have to live in the castle. You only need to come here every day to practice and attend classes." "Has Wendy told you about the characteristics of magic power?" "Yes, Your Highness." As soon as she learned that she did not need to live in the castle, Summer became much more relaxed. "Lady Wendy said that if I don't release the magic power that's accumulating every day, I'll be in great danger on my day of awakening." "That's right, so you have to practice well. I know she'll continue to teach you how to precisely control magic power and its connection with your ability." Roland didn't correct her honorifics because he thought it would be best for a beginner to have some awe. "If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask any member of the Witch Union." "I understand, Your Highness," she said with her head lowered. "But, do you think this ability is completely useless?" "I asked Lady Wendy about this, and she said only Your Highness would have the answer." "Of course not," Roland said with a smile. "You have the ability of a detective, so you'll be very helpful in fighting crimes." "Detective?" Summer looked confused. "Don't worry. Soon you'll understand." He summoned Nightingale from her mist. "From now on, this witch will be your supervisor." Chapter 471, A Reunion. It was evening. Ferlin Eltek was in his study looking over the newly issued textbooks when he suddenly heard someone knocking on the main door. "Dear, I'm busy toasting bread." "Why don't you get the door?" Irene shouted from the kitchen. "It could be Miss May." "Okay." He closed the book, walked to the front door in the living room, and unlocked the latch. The person standing outside caught him completely by surprise. "Father! What brings you here?" Ferlin exclaimed. "I followed His Highness here," the old knight said while brushing off the snow on his shoulders. "In fact, I arrived in Border Town yesterday. Though I told them that my son is living here, they still arranged a house for me in a residential area near the castle." "Come in. It's cold outside." Ferlin hastily moved out of the way. "Yes." The knight seemed surprised as he stepped into the house. "You have central heating in here?" "You know central heating?" "I only found out about it today. The last time I was here, I'd already felt that the city was inexplicably warm. I thought that the heating equipment mentioned by His Highness was a new type of fireplace. When I visited the city hall this time, I discovered that it could be equally warm indoors without fire. Only then did I realize that it made use of steam to produce heat." He took off his coat and hung it on the stand next to the door. "Wait. I recall that the last time we went together to the city hall, you weren't sure what it was as well." "I only understood after reading a city hall bulletin." Ferlin poured a cup of tea for his father. Before they do anything, they would always spend some time to explain it to the citizens. The bulletin area in the square is now even more popular than the convenience market. Does it mean that, within 2 months, His Highness was able to install the device in the homes of ordinary citizens? The knight said approvingly. Wouldn't it have cost thousands of gold royals? Our residential area was among the first to be installed with it. The western and northern zones are still in the process of ditching. It's said that water and heating supply are part of the 3 supplies project. When the construction is completed, we'll be able to do things at night as we do in the day. Nights like days? The knight's eyebrows were raised. Does it mean more candles or oil lamps? Neither. The city hall officials claim that electricity will be delivered to every home. Electricity? The old man was stupefied. I also think that it's beyond reason, but that's what His Highness propaganda states. Ferlin agreed with his father. With electricity, nights will be as bright as days. Curiously, the news sounded utterly absurd when he had heard it, but deep down in his heart, he had a feeling that since it was His Highness' words, it was not completely impossible. After all, Roland was always creating new miracles. Good evening, Knight Eltec. Just then, Irene scurried out of the kitchen, and in her hurry, she almost dropped the plate of half-baked bread she was carrying while bowing. The old knight laughed gently at the sight. Hello, Miss Irene. Don't panic. I'm not yet hungry. Ferlin saw his wife's cheeks begin to blush. Ahem. He cleared his throat before adding, there'll be just 2 more dishes today. Take it easy, the night is still young. The small family had an enjoyable dinner together. Irene was finally able to recover from her initial panic, and after the 3 of them chatted for a while, she began to clear up the utensils. Meanwhile, Ferlin's father beckoned him into the study. Ferlin could sense that his father had something important to say. Just as he expected, when the old knight sat down at the study desk, he calmly asked, Do you know what has happened in Longsong Stronghold over the past few days? I know a little, Ferlin tried to phrase his words tactfully. I've heard that there has been a rebellion by the 4 families. His Highness left Border Town to suppress it. It was publicized on the bulletin board. The city hall even mentioned this? The old knight was astonished for a brief moment before he explained the whole matter to Ferlin. Though I sent someone to inform His Highness, I didn't expect him to arrive so quickly. The result was guessable. The 4 families were no match for His Highness' troops. The Maple Leaf, Wolf and Wild Rose families were completely crushed, leaving only the Elk family in a critical state. Our family was nearly implicated in the event. What? Ferlin was greatly surprised. Father, you. Of course it wasn't me. The knight sighed. I'm already so old and don't wish to participate in such risky affairs, but your brother's different. He's eager to exceed your achievement and prove his qualities as the heir. Regrettably, he took the wrong stand. Are you saying that Miso participated in the rebellion? Ferlin's face sunk. His father nodded. After the rebellion collapsed, he was captured by His Highness soldiers. On the day of judgment, I went to the square to see him for the last time. Ferlin closed his eyes. He thought of how, after he had become a superstar knight, his brother constantly tried to make life difficult for him. Yet, Miso was his younger brother after all, and thus it was saddening to see him come to such a tragic end. Because he had no blood on his hands and surrendered compliantly, he was sentenced to 10 years of labor. He should be in the North Slope mine now. The latter part of his father's words made Ferlin regain his spirits. 10 years of labor? I thought you meant that he was executed? The knight shook his head in disagreement. When I said I saw him for the last time, I meant the last time he was a member of the family. From that moment, he was no longer a part of the Eltec family. You severed ties with him. Correct. The knight inhaled a deep breath. I'd warned him long ago, but he never took my words to heart. Someone who fools around with the family's future and risks the fate of every family member is definitely not suitable to be the successor. Even though he spoke assertively, his facial expression betrayed his sadness, and the wrinkles on his forehead deepened. Now, I only have you as my child. Father, Ferlin felt his eye sockets tingling, and he involuntarily held his father's hands. I've never begged in my life. But this time, I hope that you'll succeed the Eltec family. I have a premonition that it'll prosper again in your hands. The old knight said slowly. I'd agreed to follow His Highness here also in order to occupy a good position in the upcoming reforms. But positions can't be inherited, Father. The knight's position will also become an honorary title. I know, but you've ignored the benefits of connections and experience. His Highness has stated that the positions will be given out based on merit and outstanding ability. With the experiences and relationships that your predecessors have built up, your chances of getting a good position are far greater than that of the average person. He patted the back of his son's hands. Even if you still wish to become a teacher, I shan't stand in your way, as long as you continue the family name. Ferlin remained silent for a long before he finally nodded and said, I understand, Father. I promise you. If that's the case, I can rest assured. Knight Eltec seemed greatly relieved. By the way, if you have the choice, which department do you wish to work in? Well, how about the Second Army? I've heard Chief Commander, Iron Axe, say that apart from the battlefield soldiers, the Army also wants to form a strategy department. This plan will be tested out in the Second Army first. The old knight fixed his gaze on his son. Actually, I know that your current job isn't your favorite line of work. If you were truly happy with reading books all day, you wouldn't have chosen to be a knight in the first place. His eyes seemed to pierce insightfully into Ferlin's heart. You're still the morning light that I know, my child. Chapter 472, A Pledge of Love. Garments, shoes, mugs, spoons and forks. May checked off each item by counting with her fingers. Is there anything else I should take with me? The floor was littered with an assortment of household supplies, everything from a water kettle to a wooden bowl. The bedding is the most important, Irene thought and then said, you'd better take a set of the pillow, sheets, and blanket. Hearing these words, Rosia and Gate both burst out in a fit of giggles, but they were soon silenced, however, when May shot them a cold glance. The bedding isn't necessary. Carter says he'll buy a new set from the marketplace. It's rumored they once belonged to the four families and were dug up from their mansion's basements. Wow, then they must be made of fine silk, Irene commented enviously. I've heard there's a tailor in King City retailing fabric and garments made of pure silk. It's unfortunate that only great nobles and wealthy merchants can afford them. If they came from the four families, they must be just as good. Yes, pretty much, May replied nonchalantly. I remember he said one set was worth 5 gold royals. Wow. The three girls gasped in surprise. 5 gold royals. God almighty. Rosia smacked her lips. It would take me nearly 2 years to make that much money. How can you compare to the star of the Western region? Gate said derisively while tapping her on the head. Miss May is a celebrity who has performed in King City. As for His Excellency Carter, he's Chief Knight of His Highness. You can't compete with either of them. That's really awesome, May, Irene said, looking at May with her radiant eyes. I envy you so much. May knew only Irene felt genuinely happy for her, and her sincerity was why Morning Light was attracted to her in the first place. May also wondered how a girl like Irene, who grew up in the theater, was impervious to worldly temptations and desires all the while retaining the innocence and kindness of childhood. Although she had put her past romance out of her mind, May was still delighted to see Irene was a little envious of her. When you rise to fame, you can buy a set for yourself. You'll be paid several gold royals for starring in King City just once, not to mention the tips you'll get from the nobles after the show. But how long will it take me to become as good as you? Irene asked in frustration, mouth pulled tight. Looks like you're pretty busy here. Are you rehearsing? Right then the door was swung open abruptly. A good-looking young man poked his head in and asked, Am I interrupting? His Excellency Carter. Gate and Rosia immediately bowed. Good morning, Mr. Knight. Irene turned to smile at him. We're discussing what May should take to your place and we were just talking about you. Really? What did you say about me? Carter asked curiously, scratching the back of his head. Nothing. May stared at him and thought silently that he always appeared to be the perfect gentleman when his mouth was shut, but the illusion was shattered once he started talking. Why did you come here today? Today isn't your day off, is it? Don't worry. His Highness gave me some time off today. So. I brought you a gift. A gift? May glanced about the room. Gate soon took the hint and said, "Oh, Miss May. I just remembered that I've got something to take care of. Feel free to let me know when you've finished packing." Me too. I have to do the laundry. It's been there for a few days now. Rosia also took her leave with a bow and pulled Irene away with her as she walked out of the room. Huh? I don't need to do anything. Hang on. I want to see May's gift too. When the girl's voice gradually faded away, May sighed in relief and bolted the door. She turned to Chief Knight and asked, "So, what's the gift? I hope it's not a new invention of His Highness again." Carter glanced around before breaking the silence. Your father. He's busy. Do you think everyone has free time like you? May snapped impatiently. She had thought it would take a while for her father to become familiarized with the new surroundings after he moved from stronghold to border town. However, to her surprise, he had found a clerical job at the city hall in only 1 week, and there was nothing she could do about it. Now he was a regular employee at the Ministry of Construction. I'm busy, too. Carter threw up his hands in defense. His Highness transferred one of the most efficient employees from the Ministry of Justice to Longsong Stronghold. Now I have to deal with all sorts of tasks. On top of interrogating spies and verifying the status of the residents, I also need to hunt for criminals at large. I don't even have time for meals these days. You have no idea how fierce these criminals are. Unlike any of the locals in Western Region, these guys are gangsters, initially hiding among refugees. Now, as things have gotten a little better, they've started to make trouble. But don't worry, they only stir up on the outskirts of town where the temporary camps are to the west, and they won't get into the inner city easily. And I'll catch any of them when they're found messing around. Seeing Carter describe the matter so passionately, May broke into laughter. All right, I got it. So, Mr. Knight, as you're so devoted to the peace and order of the town, would you like to have lunch and a few drinks here before heading back to your business? I'd love to, but I'm afraid my break is almost over. Carter put down the parcel in his hand. Try this on to see if it fits. I asked His Highness to design it. His Highness? May was a little surprised. Yes. When I told His Highness about our wedding date, he mentioned a type of gown specifically worn for weddings. The only thing is that it takes a lot of effort to make one. I begged His Highness for quite a while, and even bribed Miss Soraya with ice cream bread before I finally got this dress. When May unfolded the fabric, she saw a snowy dress in the parcel. May's heart stopped beating for a moment when the knight spread out the garment. It was a simple gown with elaborate and sophisticated details. The dress was simple in the sense that it was not ornamented with any jewels, nor was it hemmed with a gilding of gold. Instead, it was purely layered with white muslins. However, the cut of the dress was rather showy. It was tightened with a girdle and flared out into a contrasting, voluminous skirt below the waistline. The skirt rippled like waves, perfectly showcasing the ingenious handicraft embedded in its design. She knew any girl, whether noble or peasant, would be fascinated by and obsessed with a gown like this just at the sight of it. May gently caressed the snowy white gown that weighed almost nothing and retired to her bedroom to put it on. When she was back in the living room, Carter's jaw dropped, struck by the breathtaking beauty he saw. God, you are stunning. Really? A rare, vivid blush rose to her cheeks. She could imagine what she now looked like without even looking into a mirror. Chief Knight's gaping expression had already told her everything. May went up to Carter and gently pressed her lips to his cheek. Thank you for your gift. I really love it. The knight flung his arms around her in response. Watching Carter's face slowly approaching hers, May closed her eyes. It doesn't sound too bad to be called Melanis, she thought. Chapter 473, The Third Step of City Construction. After 2 weeks learning and exploration, Berev, the governor of the city hall, held the first municipal plenary session in the castle hall at the end of the first month in spring of the new year at His Highness' request. Aside from the directors of all the departments, some of the nobles in Stronghold were also invited to the session, bringing the total number of the attendees to 65. Berev knew the learning process itself was also an evaluation. After working as a city hall governor for a year, he could now easily distinguish capable nobles from useless dandies and idlers. It was why half of the nobles had already failed the assessment. As His Highness described, he had offered these petty nobles an opportunity to catch the express train, but the reality was ruthless. People who were unable to keep pace with changes would be naturally obsolete as time went by. Berev shared the same thoughts. Whether His Highness was a demon or a god, it did not change the fact that his territory had manifested an atmosphere entirely different from those in other kingdoms. If this was a new era, he would be happy to dive into it with the prince. The main topic of the discussion for today's meeting was the final vote on the Unification Act, which would be enacted after the city construction. He would also need to inform the nobles in Stronghold of the Act's contents. Berev had prepared for this moment for a long time, and now it was finally the time to uncover the details. Everyone was given a thin hardcover book with gilded letters on its cover, which read Basic Laws of the Kingdom. It contained some core subjects of law drafted and edited by His Highness himself. He could tell just by its name that His Highness had big ambition, and he also believed the prince had the capacity to make towns beyond the western region flourish. Let's get started. Roland, who seated himself at the end of the long table, instructed with a nod. Yes, Your Highness. Berev cleared his throat and ventured. Perhaps all of you have heard that we're going to build a city in the western region. The book in front of you is the Unification Act to be enacted in His Highness' territory once the construction of the city is completed. Feel free to read it through by yourself, or you can listen to my presentation. If you have any questions or concerns, interrupt me anytime, His Highness will answer them. A slight rustle of pages swept over the hall. Berev flipped over the cover, revealing the first page of the book made of fine parchment. The first thing you see now is the outline of the contents, which contains the structure and institution of the new territory. Article 1, Roland Wimbledon shall reserve all the rights with respect to the territories under his jurisdiction. Article 2, the City Hall is the highest authority of the territory, administering all the matters concerning the territory under the supervision of Roland Wimbledon. Article 3, every person, upon entry to the territory, shall have the right to gain the status of citizenship through multiple channels. The City Hall has the obligation to guarantee the provision of at least 3 such channels to the public. Article 4, every individual, upon gaining the status of citizenship, shall not be discriminated based on gender or their former status, namely freeman, farmhand, servant, and slave. Every citizen of the territory has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law, and has the legal obligations to pay taxes, defend the territory and serve in the military. Article 5, every noble shall be treated equally as a regular citizen and shall no longer be privileged based on his/her title. Titles shall be honorary without granting the subject noble executive power, and they shall be conferred by inheritance in accordance with the law. Article 6, every citizen has the right to seek protection of life, security, and personal properties from Roland Wimbledon. Article 7, every citizen has the right to education, liberty of work and marriage. Article 8, commercial interactions and free trade are encouraged in the territory, provided that such activities are carried out in accordance with the law. Article 9. Berev ran his fingers through the pages while explaining the articles one by one. Few codes drafted by the nobles concerned civilians. Even freemen in the city were viewed as subjects of exploitation by great nobles. It was indeed a rare thing that the laws made by His Highness involved so many rights and protections of civilians. The prince probably believed they could only win the Battle of Doomsday with the help of people's power. Berev didn't care who His Highness relied on. To him, nobles and civilians were the same. He only cared about trying his best to complete His Highness' tasks and keeping a firm grip on power. In King's City, he had been transferred from the Astrology Association to the Ministry of Finance, serving as an assistant to treasurer. He had thought he would soon stand on the highest level of authority in the Kingdom of Grey Castle, only to realize a decade of waiting had turned his ambition into a desolate, hopeless dream. He had obeyed King Wimbledon III's order to accompany Prince Roland to Border Town due to a faint and tenuous promise made to the past king, and also due to his morbid disappointment brooding for years. Yet, he had never expected his long-awaited dream would somehow come true in another way. Barav had not seen a real demon, but he knew well the strength and power of the armored knights. If His Highness could defeat the knights at a single blow, he could certainly sweep away all his obstacles in the kingdom. Eventually, the prince would ascend to the throne and become the reigning sovereign of the state, and he would be the hand of the king. If the treasurer was still alive by then, what a bitter countenance would he show to Barav? As most of the contents in the outline had been read out to subjects in plain language before, none of the directors were surprised. However, when he read the part that stipulated the prohibition of human trafficking and the abolishment of slavery, the nobles began murmuring. All the other articles were passed unilaterally. No one questioned the article on the reform of the noble. These petty nobles had not benefited much from their territories since most of their lands were in deserted areas, so they did not care much about the so-called feudal power and legislative power. Besides, after 2 weeks of study, many of them had planned to sell the territories to the city hall and use the proceeds to start a new business, such as a machinery factory and a chemical plant. The conference started in the morning and did not stop until the afternoon. Everybody was focused on the presentation. When it was time for lunch, the servants placed the food on the table to let the attendees eat while reading. Barav had a lot of water. Although he had a sore throat, he was happy to explain every detail of the articles to the people present. Finally, they entered the last topic of discussion, which was the only article in the basic laws of the kingdom that required everybody's opinions. It was the flag and the name of the new city. The conference hall was soon filled with a buzz of debate. Barav asked everybody to come up with a name and an ideal design for the flag. The attendees would have to place their work on the table and pick the best one. After several rounds of voting, the flag and the name of the new city were nailed. The design of the flag was based on the emblem of the royal family of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Its basic pattern was a gun and a tower, above which was a big pentagram with 3 smaller ones below. The big pentagram represented Lord Roland Wimbledon, while the smaller ones each represented the city hall, the army, and the witch union. As for the city name, they picked City of Neverwinter. Chapter 474, The Killing Machine. 2 days after the enlarged meeting, Iron Axe was ordered to test new weapons again. Since the northwest side was vulnerable to the attacks of demonic beasts, the new shooting range was set on the other side of the Redwater River. When Iron Axe got there, the prince's guards had already surrounded the place with hemp ropes and red flags, and set a checkpoint at either end of the steel bridge. Unauthorized personnel were not allowed in that area. Obviously, His Highness took the test on new weapons seriously. Iron Axe walked quickly in the uneven snow, and every guard he met gave him a friendly glance. Seeing this, he could not help but remember his first time participating in a test of flintlocks. Back then, he was a nobody, and the people of the Kingdom of Grey Castle were vigilant and suspicious of him because he was from the Sand Nation. He had lived in the town for 5 years by then, but only had built up relations with huntsmen living near him because of his expertise in archery, and no one knew him beyond the old district. At the time, he believed that he would live in seclusion in this desolate town as a hunter until he died of old age, or got killed by demonic beasts or prey. He didn't expect that His Highness would handpick him and show him the power of fire and thunder. Then, fast changes began to happen. He fought against demonic beasts in the militia, which was then turned into Border Town's first army. He was promoted rapidly from head of the hunter squad to commander of the first army. To his great surprise, and to make up for his greatest regret of his life, he had met the heiress of the Osha clan, Lady Drow Silvermoon, again in the town because of His Highness' open attitude towards witches. Due to this trust, recognition, and improvement of his fate, he swore allegiance to his new lord deep within his heart. In the middle of the shooting range, Iron Axe saw His Highness Roland, Chief Knight, and unexpectedly, several sleeping island witches. "Your Highness, Iron Axe reporting to you." He walked forward and saluted the prince. The prince nodded and said, "Everyone's here. Let's get started." He gave 2 long guns to Iron Axe and Carter. "It's one of my newly developed weapons, still in the prototype stage. The numbers are limited, so take turns trying them, please." Iron Axe carefully studied the gun in his hand. It looked similar to a revolving rifle except that it had no cartridge. This made him wonder if its bullets had to be reloaded through the muzzle like the oldest flintlocks. "It's called a bolt rifle," His Highness quickly explained. "It uses the newest smokeless gunpowder. The caliber is 8 mm, smaller than the 12 mm of a revolving rifle, but it's more powerful." He turned the gun over to give a demonstration. The ammunition is inserted from the front of the trigger, and each clip can be embedded with 5 bullets. However, it cannot fire continuously like a revolving rifle, so you need to reload it after ejecting all the bullets. Soon after the prince's demonstration, Iron Axe understood how to operate the new rifle and shot a clip of bullets. The kickback of the rifle was quite strong. Every time the gun was discharged, he felt a heavy kick on his shoulder from the butt, and it was much louder than a revolver. 5 bullets shot out of an old gun would usually cause thick smoke that blocked his sight, but now there was no smoke in front of the muzzle, which might be due to the smokeless gunpowder that His Highness had just mentioned. Apart from that, there was nothing special about this new bolt rifle. Iron Axe thought there was a substantial improvement from the flintlock to the revolver, but the bolt rifle seemed to have no improvement and even wasn't as good as a revolver. Its most obvious shortcoming was the low rate of fire. He could fire continuously while standing with a revolving rifle, but it was inconvenient to do so with the bolt rifle, since he had to reload the gun by hand and then raise it back up to aim at the target again after each shot. Though this process took much less time than a flintlock, it wasn't effective in suppressing the enemy in a short time. For example, it was obviously less practical than a revolver in battles, like the ones against the noble rebels in Longsong Stronghold with close combat in the streets or indoors. Iron Axe told Roland his honest opinion, and Carter voiced a similar view. The prince nodded and said, "Yes, it's not as convenient as a revolver, but it also has a great advantage. Andrea, come here and show them." He gave the rifle to the witch and said, "Remember to shoot using your ability." "Uh-huh." The blonde witch picked up the gun and skillfully reloaded it. They could tell that this was not her first time operating this new weapon. "Now, watch me." With 3 deafening shots, Iron Axe was shocked to see the 3 farthest wooden targets fall down in turn. Her bullets shot the targets that looked as small as fingernails at the distance, on their thin sticks below the target boards. They were standing at least 400 meters away. "Your Highness, it's," Carter stuttered in disbelief. Andrea's derivative ability enables her to accurately hit the target with a gun or a bow, the prince explained with a smile, but her ability works on neither bullets nor arrows. It only gives her proficiency for using weapons. For example, she'll hit a target 10 meters away if she throws a stone at it, but if she throws a bird at it, her ability just won't work. "You mean, ordinary people can also achieve that kind of proficiency through training?" "Exactly. The greatest merit of this bolt rifle is its greatly improved shooting range and accuracy. Unlike the guns before, there's no gap between the barrel and the cartridge, so there's no air leak in this new rifle," Roland nodded and answered. "With a telescopic sight on it, any ordinary soldier can use it to precisely shoot down enemies around 400 to 500 meters away, while a revolver can only shoot accurately within 100 meters. Iron Axe instantly realized why this weapon was so deadly. Most people would never be on guard against attacks from this long distance. If the shooter hit himself inside a residential area or at a higher point, he could easily kill his target. And if the shooter was Lady Nightingale, nobody could survive bullets coming from an invisible source. "Your Highness, you agreed to give me one when it's put into mass production," Andrea reminded Roland, covering her mouth. "Of course," Roland said and put the 2 rifles away. He walked to the other side and removed a cloth covering something. In fact, bolt rifles are just the beginning. This one is the focus of today's test. Iron Axe took to the newly unveiled weapon as soon as he saw it. Different from rifles made of steel and wood, this new, black gun seemed to be made of pure metal. It was also bigger than all the other guns. Including the tripod beneath it, it was about half of his height. Its long barrel was half as thick as his wrist. Connected to the big gun, a long, thin piece of cloth carried shining bullets. It was obviously nothing like the guns before in both design and size. Chapter 475, The Light. This is a heavy machine gun. It uses the same bullets as a bolt rifle. You can pull a bullet out of this pouch and shoot it from the new rifle, the prince said and patted the big machine gun. Its mechanism is far more complicated than a rifle, so I won't bother giving you all the unnecessary details. I named it Mark I Type HMG. I'll show you how to use it. He sat behind the firearm and pulled the trigger. What happened next was hard for Iron Axe to comprehend. All of a sudden, flames shot out of the muzzle, and the strong airflow caused by the gunfire shot the fluffy snow into the air. The strip of bullets seemed to be constantly pulled into the gun. Simultaneously, hot, empty bullet shells were rapidly ejected from the other side one by one. Several dozen shells fell to the ground in just a second. This machine gun sounded fiercer than a whole team of riflemen in the Flintlock squad. No pause could be heard between the gunshots. The prince aimed at the ground in front of him instead of the distant targets and shot continuously into the snow. Before the snow in one place could fall back to the ground, the snow in another place was propelled upward, making the snowy ground look like the surface of boiling water. The hail of bullets formed a web of death, and anyone attempting to break through it would be riddled with bullets. It's amazing, Chief Knight murmured. Carter was not the only one who was astonished. Iron Axe glanced around and saw that all the witches were dumbfounded, and only Lady Nightingale, who always stayed beside Roland, seemed quite calm. Ashes, the black-haired witch carrying a giant sword, showed a mixture of shock, confusion, and frustration. Iron Axe could not help but feel the same way. He had become chief bodyguard of the Osha clan because of his proficiency in knife work and archery, skills he had honed with regular practices since childhood. Like him, the most powerful warriors with outstanding talent were popular among clan leaders in the southernmost region. However, even the quickest and strongest fighter in the world could never escape these bullets that moved faster than sight. Astoundingly, the Mark I didn't even have the flaw of requiring a pause to reload bullets. If the First Army was equipped with 20 heavy machine guns, the enemy's fighting skills acquired from more than 10 years of hard work would become a joke. A fighter would naturally find it hard to accept the fact. Fortunately, he found a new path. Leaf moved rapidly through the heavy undergrowth of plants to drive the demonic beasts that had intruded into the misty forest towards the city wall. Now, she could control an area almost as large as the town. The trees and foliage in the area were like her eyes and limbs. They could grow according to her will and form a defense line against enemies, but His Highness kept telling her to inform the army whenever she found any demonic beasts or demons instead of directly fighting against them, especially demons. If demons sensed her existence and destroyed the whole forest, it would be a significant loss, as the town now counted on her to provide early warnings, and a forest that could be adjusted on demand was a great asset. Leaf reclaimed an empty lot near the town and planned to grow golden ones wheat on it as soon as the months of demons ended. This time, with the heart of forest to provide her with magic power, the seeds of the wheat would grow continuously and produce enough seeds for all the farmers in the western region. Suddenly, she sensed a group of demonic wolf hybrids approaching from the edge of the forest. Leaf immediately turned to look at these invaders and saw 8 strong demonic beasts fleeing into the deep forest. As she was about to send out a carrier pigeon to inform the First Army and meanwhile drive them to the city wall, she felt something strange. They did not look as ferocious as usual. Instead, they seemed to be driven by something. Even her branches and vines could not stop them now. Could it be demons returning? Leaf frowned, and as she was about to widen her range of sight, she felt a hint of warmth on her head. She promptly looked up and saw golden rays of light peep out from several cracks in the cloudy sky, shining down on the snowy white land of the western region. How do I deal with this one here? Tilly pointed at an equation in a book. Well, you put in equation 4 to create a new equation, and then you'll derive it to get the one in the book. Anna quickly wrote down the derivation process on a piece of scrap paper. That's it. I see. Tilly clapped her hands and said, if you put this variable in, the result should be close to 1. Impressive. You can calculate the result in your mind, Anna gasped with admiration. That's just because of my ability. You're the amazing one. You can learn everything in the prince's new book so quickly, said Princess Tilly with a smile. Anna gave her a soft smile. Only the mention of Roland Wimbledon could bring a smile like that to her face. Every time Tilly saw that smile, she could not help but think that it was impossible for a simple, honest girl like Anna to like a wicked man. Roland must be different now, she presumed, regardless of whether he was the real Prince Roland or not. Actually, Tilly herself felt that the new Roland was totally different from all the nobles in this world, as if he were from another world. However, at the same time, she felt comfortable around him and liked his unique charm more and more as time went by. Looking up at the cloudy sky, Tilly even hoped for the months of demons to continue like this so she could learn all his knowledge. That way, she might be able to truly understand the new Roland, even if he never wanted to talk about himself. She shook her head to dismiss these thoughts. Tilly pointed to the next question. To her astonishment, the book was suddenly lit up. The two witches looked out the window simultaneously. Traces of light had mysteriously appeared in the snowy sky, and the long-lost sunshine now rimmed the clouds with golden light. The locals bustling about in the town sensed the change, too. Soon, a growing number of people poured into streets, cheering. Tilly looked at the sky in a daze, all sorts of emotions welling up inside her. When the gunfire stopped, empty bullet shells were piled up beside the prince's feet. A dull, light tint of red could be seen on the muzzle of the gun, and white smoke was coming out of the barrel. Even the drop of a pin could be heard now as nobody aired their opinions. Words were unnecessary since the fixed look on their faces told the shock brought by this new weapon. Iron Axe could not control his excitement any longer and knelt down in the manner of the Sand Nation. The world is yours, your highness. He firmly believed that his new path was to lead the first army, which was equipped with brand new firearms to expand the territory for his highness Roland. A hand reached in front of Iron Axe. The prince pulled him up and did not look as content as Iron Axe had expected. Instead, he looked at the impassable mountain range and said in a deep voice, "Our real enemy is demons. Even so, I'll still fight for you until I die." Before Iron Axe could speak his thoughts, a dazzling ray of light pierced the cloudy sky, illuminating the world below. The witches behind exclaimed in amazement, and Roland looked up and smiled. More and more rays of light came down from above and became brighter and brighter. Soon, it was hard for them to stare at the light. Meanwhile, dark clouds silently melted away as the ice did with fire. The sun appeared again in the sky. The months of demons ended. Chapter 476, The Victory Day. It was still dark outside, and someone had been knocking endlessly on Kikuzum's door. He yawned and subconsciously reached out to grab his coat, and then he realized he no longer needed a coat. The thick brick wall kept the chill away, and the incredible heating made the inside warm. No matter how heavy the snow was outside, the house no longer let the cold in like it used to, and the roof no longer leaked. Such a high-quality house was only fit for the nobles in Valencia. Of course, it was a little smaller. He opened the door and found a young boy, his assistant Pike, standing outside. "Why aren't you up yet?" "We have to hurry, Captain. Otherwise, we won't get a good spot." "Do we need to leave so early?" Kikuzum stuck his head out and looked at the sky. The dawn was peeking through the clouds, and soft morning sunshine lit a small section of the sky. "Of course," the boy exclaimed. "My neighbors told me there would be a performance from the Star Flower Troupe during the celebration, and we won't get into the square if we're late." "All right, wait a minute." The old man shrugged and returned to his bedroom to change. He looked at the other empty bed and sighed softly. The Victory Day. Is there any celebration like this in Longsong Stronghold? If not, Vader would miss it. They went to the square and found that there were banners strung up on ropes and tied to the trees on both sides of the street. The small town looked bright and new under the morning sunshine. Every now and then, people joined them from the pathways into the main road and walked alongside them. It seemed that they were going to the square too. Kakuzum had heard about the celebration from Pike. The prince had named the first day after the months of demons as the Victory Day to celebrate passing the months safely. On that day, everyone in the town had the day off and enjoyed a grand bonfire party in the square. Kakuzum's assistant had learned about this and invited him to go to square with him. After some thought, the old man agreed. As they entered, they found a fenced-in area in the center of the square and policemen with black uniforms maintaining order. Quite a few people had arrived early and were standing around waiting. The two quickly found a place near the stage and chatted as they waited for the celebration to begin. At noon, crowds gathered in the square and the prince appeared in the center of the theater. As soon as he showed up, Kakuzum heard overwhelming cheers. The people around him excitedly raised their hands and shouted, "Long live your highness!" Prince Roland smiled. He waited for the cheers to pass, raised his fist, and said loudly, "We have defeated evil once again." The square exploded in instant cheers. The deafening sound shook the old man's heart. He had not seen such a respected lord in a very long time. "My people, no matter where you come from, the western region, the northern region, the eastern region or the southernmost region, as long as you have made a contribution to our town, the glory belongs to you. This glory belongs to everyone who gave their blood and sweat to Border Town." The prince's calm, emotional voice seemed to have magic power and could be heard without him having to shout. "Today is the Victory Day. It was set by all of you. Evil has not been completely eliminated and will come back sooner or later, but no matter how many times our enemies come, victory is ours as long as we unite and work together." The old man had never heard a nobility refer to the civilians and himself as we, but his highness didn't seem to mind. He looked at the people naturally, without arrogance or scorn. In the prince's eyes, he and his subjects were together as one. It was incredible, but unexpectedly harmonious. "Now, let's cheer for this hard-won victory and raise our glasses to celebrate. Long live your highness! Long live victory!" The cheers rang throughout the square, and the people raised their right hand to show their respect, including Kakuzum. "This is a lord who is worthy of my loyalty," Pike said passionately while thumping his chest. Next, it was the Starflower Troop's turn, and many people whistled excitedly. We haven't seen their performances in such a long time. Ms. Irene is still so beautiful. But compared to Miss May, she still lacks lasting appeal. It's Ms. May now. Haven't you heard the news? She's about to marry Chief Knight, and the prince has already sent a wedding gift. Listening to the people around, Pike asked in wonder, the name of a troop is usually either the same as the theater or the name of the town, so why does the troop of Border Town have such a strange name? You aren't a Westerner, are you? Asked someone immediately. Ms. May and Ms. Irene are both from Longsong Theater, and Ms. May is called the Star of the Western Region, while Ms. Irene is called the Flower of Tomorrow. Now, they both live in Border Town, so the troop's name is Starflower Troop. Look, it's beginning. This was not Kakuzum's first time watching theatrical performances, but the story was quite unique. Instead of a normal love story between nobilities, it told the history of the Western region. The actors played ordinary people living in Border Town. In the beginning, they were helpless, confused, and chased around like lambs during the months of demons. Then they decided to stay in the town and fight against the demonic beasts. The whole story was full of twists and turns, which were very gripping. When the characters died from hunger and cold or were killed in the line of defense to protect their families, the audience felt as if they were there. The old man was quickly captured by the performance, and even people who had just come to the Western region could feel the sacrifices that citizens of Border Town made and their unremitting efforts for survival. When the play was finished, a thunderous applause rang above the square. Kakuzum was dumbstruck by what he saw next. A girl with long flaxen hair held a black line in her hand. She cut the wood stage into various parts, and used them to light a giant bonfire. The crowd wasn't scared by this, and they even chanted her name. Miss Anna. Miss Anna. As sheep baked on the bonfire, the atmosphere in the square reached its climax. The locals spontaneously stood in a long line and then began to dance strangely, the last part of the celebration. According to the people standing around Kikuzum and Pike, as long as the dance continued, the barbecue would continue until midnight. "Captain, let's go together." Pike gulped. He was eager to join. "I'm too old to dance," Kikuzum shook his head. "You should join them." "I'll go then." He stuck out his tongue. "I'll share some barbecue with you when I get it." Looking at the boy dancing with the crowd, the old man couldn't help but laugh. He had been wondering how to make the name of the concrete boat assigned to him memorable and unique, and now he had an idea. "I'll name it Victory," he thought. Chapter 477, Love and Affection. Just like last year, the witches held the feast in the castle. Leaf turned the backyard that had been expanded several times into an open-air campsite fenced by olive trees. Around the raging bonfire, the witches could appreciate the starry night sky anytime. Compared with the last barbecue feast, which was only attended by 5 witches, this one was much more crowded, reaching a total number of 25 witches. All the witches from the Witch Cooperation Association came, along with the 7 witches from Sleeping Island, as well as Maggie, Lucia, Agatha, Spear, Paper, and Summer. Plates of finely cut food and various sauces were put on a small table by the bonfire for the witches to eat freely. After the territories of the rebel nobles were completely cleared, the supply of meat and cloth in Border Town had greatly increased. Also served on the table was the low-alcohol fruit wine brewed by Evelyn, as well as the ice cream provided by Agatha. While Lightning was enthusiastically demonstrating to the crowd how to grill a chicken foot, Maggie had begun to enjoy a hot roasted steak. Having spent a year in the mountains and jungles with Lightning, Maggie had got familiar with all sorts of grilled food, and she filled her waist pocket with various spices, just as Lightning did. "I think this is a waste of time." Agatha smeared honey on the roasted meatballs in her hand. "The demons are bound to attack us, but we're not seizing this precious time to prepare. Instead, we're just celebrating the latest victory. When the enemy breaks into our city, everything is done for," she said while chewing the food. "Take it easy. It'll be okay." Roland handed her a bunch of stuffed beef balls. Obviously, she was very fond of the juicy meatballs. "A proper balance of work and rest will increase the work efficiency. Besides, resting for one day won't prevent us from defeating the demons, and even if we lose, at least we've enjoyed the sweetness of life." "Nonsense," Agatha said while rolling her eyes. She then took the beef balls and put them over the bonfire after dipping it in a bowl of oil. With the help of her freezing ability, she could keep the meatballs at just the right temperature regardless of the heat from the fire. Clearly, her recent work with the process of cooling nitrogen had helped her to perfect control of her magic powers. On the other side, the newcomer Summer apparently hadn't seen so much meat in a long time. Although she could not stop swallowing saliva, her hands kept still. Fortunately, after noticing Summer's timidity, Wendy pulled this newly awoken sister to her side and shared the food that she roasted with Summer and Paper. The 3 witches from Sleeping Island, Ashes, Andrea, and Shavy, began to play poker games while waiting for their food to be grilled. In the past few months, they had learned all the variations of poker that Roland was familiar with. As long as there was no attack from the demonic beasts, they would get together and play poker in the castle hall. And the other witches from Sleeping Island, such as Candle, Evelyn, and Sylvie, who had got familiar with the witches in the little town, were having a good time talking with Leaf, Echo, Soraya and others, just like a family did. Looking at the harmonious scene, Roland felt quite gratified. After a year's effort, changes in the western region began to emerge. The people's enthusiastic cheers at the square at daytime and the heartfelt smile on the witches' faces were all payback for his efforts. Such kind of payback was so sweet that Roland could not help but feel intoxicated by it. As the bonfire gradually died out, the time approached midnight. Roland asked Nightingale and Ashes to escort Nana and Summer home respectively, while he stepped onto the second floor of the castle, waiting for Anna to appear. He decided to take the initiative instead of waiting passively, or rather, postponing. Silver moonlight cast into the castle through the corridor window. In the moonlight, Roland saw Anna's blue eyes. The scene was quite familiar to him, but their positions were reversed from the last time. Half hidden in darkness, Anna's pupils reflected a faint luster, like stars in the night sky where all the other stars could not be seen. The sky only belonged to her tonight. Roland did not speak, but walked forward. Holding Anna's hand, they went to the third floor. This was not the first time that Roland had kept this close to Anna, but still, his heart beat fiercely. Through the hand he was holding, he could tell Anna was nervous too. Nevertheless, she followed him without any hesitation. They entered Roland's bedroom. When Roland closed the door, turned around, took a deep breath, and wondered what to say, Anna kissed him. The tip of her tongue softly pried open Roland's mouth. Roland felt lost in her luscious breath. At that moment, the title of a song popped into his mind, Sealed with a Kiss. When you don't know what to say, kiss. When you've no idea how to express your feelings, kiss. Kissing is the speech without a sound and kissing is scorching affection. When their lips finally parted, Anna's cheeks had turned red. I have a present for you. From his pocket, Roland took out 2 red magic stones, which had been polished, rimmed with gold and strung together by a thin, red thread at the top. Is this a sigil? Yes. After being connected together by magic power, a stone of pathfinding and a stone of positioning make a tracking sigil. Roland helped Anna to put the stone of pathfinding around her neck. Now no matter where I go, you can find me with the help of the stones. Anna must have sensed something unusual because she stared at Roland, motionless. Just then, Roland carefully spoke each word while softly holding her cheeks with his hands. Will you marry me, Anna? The peacefulness of the clear blue lake was interrupted by a pouring rain. After a long pause, Anna nodded and said, yes. What followed next was so natural, the long-held emotions broke through the last barrier at that very moment and entangled with one another. Roland picked her up by the waist and put her onto the bed. He kissed her from her forehead down to her neck with tenderness, and clumsily unsnapped her buttons. With her eyes open, Anna stared at Roland as if she wanted to imprint every single move of his into her brain. When the girl's fair and smooth body was exposed, Roland hugged her gently in his arms and covered them up with a quilt. Without the barrier of clothes, he clearly felt Anna's rhythmic heartbeat, as if her heart was about to pop out of her chest. This time, Anna whispered in Roland's ear. What about it? I won't fall asleep again. Roland couldn't help but burst into laughter, which eased the tension between them. He lightly brushed her nose and said, even if you fall asleep, I won't leave you alone. Their mouths searched for each other once again, their bodies became one, and their hearts merged together. Chapter 478, Witnessing the Establishment of the New City. After King Love, Anna rested her head in Roland's arms and nuzzled up against him like a cat. Your Highness, it's so good to have met you, she whispered to him. Her breathing had just returned to normal from all the excitement. Call me Roland. He stroked her long hair and smiled. There isn't anyone else around anyway, and I've never heard you call my name. Roland. Good girl. He tickled her ears until she laughed, and then he exclaimed, actually, it's me who should have said that. In the past, I never imagined that I would meet such a brilliant girl like you. Not even in the palace? No, Roland shook his head faintly. Sometimes, I even think I'm dreaming. Anna remained silent for a while, and then cuddled closer to Roland before saying, I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere. These words aroused his thoughts. He recalled that she had said the same thing to him before. Living like a normal person, but I do not care about that. I just want to stay at your Highness' side, nothing more. What are you talking about? I'm not going anywhere. She's the petite and frail lass who was rolled up in a corner of a prison cell, the diligent girl who practiced her ability in maid's clothes, the daring young lady who conjured a huge fire and sealed up the city wall, the diffident maid who raised her head and kissed me, and the lovely young woman who asked me to accompany her on the day of awakening. Such scenes flashed in front of Roland one after another. Without realizing it, the two of them had built up so many memories together. It's true. He slid his hand down Anna's silky hair and caressed her slender back. You're right here with me. Feelings are really intriguing, he thought to himself. Though these are nothing but meaningless and silly words, they warm and melt my heart like nothing else can. An even longer period of silence followed. Then, just as he thought she had fallen asleep, she spoke. I'm a witch. I know. Sister Wendy told me that witches are infertile, Anna muttered. This will be troublesome for you. I'm not afraid, Roland replied assertively. Compared to the impending third battle of divine will, this is nothing. He once spent time considering how to arrange his succession, but discontinued it after hearing Agatha's report. The battle that would decide man's fate was around the corner. All kingdoms would be completely decimated if they were unable to defeat the demons. Compared to this, the succession issue was not important. He paused momentarily when he thought of this. After a while, he continued, actually, I was a bit worried earlier on. About what? I was worried that you would use this reason to reject me. Why? Anna looked puzzled. I want to be with you, no matter I'm a witch or not. Roland guffawed when he heard her reply. Indeed, since I met Anna, she's always been like that, straightforward, never beating around the bush, and expressive of whatever idea she had. With her, there would never be a Korean drama case of I mean well for you, but I can't tell you misunderstanding. I've thought too much. As they chatted, Roland began to feel his body revitalize. Sensing the changes, Anna kissed him on the neck and climbed on top of him. The night was still very young. The next day, Roland woke up much later than usual. When he opened his eyes, the sun was already directly above the castle. He looked beside himself and was slightly shocked. Anna was nowhere to be found. Could it be that what happened last night was merely a dream? He bent his body down and breathed a sigh of relief. Strands of flaxen hair were left on the pillow, and he could smell a faint fragrance on one side of his clothes. What are you doing? Anna's voice suddenly came from overhead. Roland raised his head and felt awkward. He must have looked unglamorous sniffing all around while lying on the pillow. Ahem, I was just counting the strands of hair you left. Hey, when did you get up? I went to bring breakfast to you. She placed the plate she was holding on the bedside table. Her actions and movements seemed a little unlike her usual self. I saw you sleeping soundly when I woke up and didn't want to disturb you. Sorry, Roland said apologetically, I should have helped. After so many physical activities during the night, Roland feared that she was feeling uncomfortable despite her exceptional recovery capabilities. What nonsense. Anna laughed meekly. You're a prince. He shook her head and did not say one more word. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. After embracing for a while, she patted him on the back. All right, that's enough. Since you're awake, hurry up and eat your breakfast. I still have work to do today. Shouldn't you rest for a few more days? That won't do, Anna replied earnestly. We have to face the demons soon. Miss Soraya and Miss Agatha are working really hard, and thus it won't be right for me to slack off. She smiled sweetly. You too. Roland. After kissing goodbye to Anna, the prince strode to his office in buoyant mood. When he pushed open the door, he was surprised to see Tilly waiting for him and sitting by the table. Good morning, he greeted. Is there an issue? Look, it's already noon. Tilly smiled back at him. And you look like you had a good dream. Do I? Roland placed a hand around his mouth. Of course, you're all smiles today. She shrugged her shoulders and the smile on her face disappeared. This time I came to say goodbye to you. Roland was stunned. Goodbye? Are you returning to Sleeping Island? I've stayed here for too long. Even though I've kept in touch with the fjords by letter, but I've to go back sooner or later. Now that the months of demons are over, the objective of my trip can be considered done. She stood up and walked over to the French window. Don't worry. Even though I'll be across the sea, I'll give you my full support in fighting the church and the demons. Can't you settle here in the western region? Roland made a last-ditch attempt to persuade her to stay. There's a huge amount of vacant land on the south bank of the Redwater River. It can accommodate all of the witches. We've discussed this before. Tilly sighed lightly. This is not a problem of finding residents. It seems like she has made up her mind, Roland reckoned. Though he understood that the decision was a sign of her political maturity and responsibility as a leader, he was very unhappy about it. At least stay for another week. I'll prepare a few useful things for the witches in the fjords. Oh? Tilly turned and faced him. What are they? Books, courseware, and a few exercises. He said while flicking his fingernails. This will not only save you the trouble of making copies but also enhance their learning effectiveness. Also, I'll pack a few revolvers. These can be used for self-protection in case you encounter enemies equipped with the God's Stone of Retaliation. There'll also be 2 steam engines which can be used to pump water for irrigation and salt extraction. I see, Tilly turned away and said. Thank you very much. And there's the groundbreaking day. Roland said, emphasizing every word. I hope that on that day, you can join me in witnessing the establishment of City of Neverwinter. Chapter 479, Choice of Nightingale's Heart. Recently, Wendy spent her life in an exceptionally fulfilling way. True to her name, Paper had quickly absorbed the knowledge regarding witches and magic power. She made great progress in learning how to read and write as well as knowledge about the natural world. At present, she was already able to learn new vocabularies on her own. There was only a bit of concern about her tutoring. On occasions, she would raise questions that even Wendy could not answer, and that meant either Anna or Roland had to be consulted. Compared to Paper, Summer's progress was much slower. This was perhaps a matter of age. Every word had to be recited a few times to her before she could remember its spelling. Furthermore, she seemed confused by natural knowledge. But Wendy was okay with it. After all, what she did not lack at the moment was time and patience. In fact, it would be more problematic for her if her students were all as smart as Anna. Every morning, she would call her 2 students into the living room to go through the homework that was assigned the day before. This was in line with what His Highness had told all of the Department of Education's teachers. The knowledge that was learned without practicing would be forgotten quickly, and only through regular practice would the knowledge be committed to memory. Wendy agreed very much with this statement. The next lesson was practicing magic power. For this, Paper could assist Agatha to produce acid, or go to the shipyard to help in accelerating the hardening of cement. Hence, Wendy mainly tutored the newcomer, Summer. She had heard that Summer would soon be joining Nightingale in the Security Bureau and help His Highness to recreate crime scenes. Thus, the most important thing to learn was how to precisely control the reversal of time. Fortunately, using magic ability was as natural as breathing to witches. Even the slowest students could not go very wrong once they felt the operation of magic. Wendy often raised the example of Maggie in order to encourage Summer not to be disheartened by her lack of natural proficiency in magic power. If even a pigeon was able to evolve, surely a regular witch could also do so. Of course, after that, she would secretly bring a few pieces of honey roast meat to Maggie as compensation. Elementary classes were conducted in the evenings. In consideration of the different learning paces of incoming students, His Highness had sorted the Witch Union into 2 classes. The early comers would continue to receive lessons from Scroll and also begin to learn knowledge about elementary physics and chemistry, while the new arrivals would receive extra tuition from Wendy after their usual lessons. This was the most relaxing part of Wendy's day. As the earliest witch from the Witch Cooperation Association to join the union, she had increased the gulf between herself and the other top-scoring sisters after a period of learning. She would feel a great amount of pressure on her shoulders whenever she remembered that His Highness had conferred on her the role of manager of the association. Only while teaching the newcomers did she feel free and able to put her heart and soul into the tutoring. After assigning homework to the two students, Wendy went to have a hot bath. When she returned comfortably to her bedroom, she was surprised to see Nightingale sitting by her bed and dazing while holding a copy of Natural Science Theoretical Foundation. She's definitely dazing. If she was focusing on the book, she would have fallen asleep within minutes. What's the matter? Wendy uncovered her quilt and climbed onto the bed, sitting next to Nightingale. The latter shifted her head slightly and briefly glanced at Wendy, who gasped when seeing Nightingale's vacant expression. Wendy had seen such an expression on Nightingale's face only in Silver City, which was the first time they met. At that time, Nightingale was walking alone spiritlessly through the snowy streets, in complete disregard of the snowflakes that fell on her shoulders. "His Highness Roland's together with Anna already," she muttered, "and it was I who encouraged him." Wendy was at a loss for words. She had also noticed that Anna and His Highness had grown closer recently, but this was acknowledged by everyone and thus it was not surprising. Anna was the first witch that His Highness met, and was impeccable in all respects. Apart from her inability to give birth, she was considered by Scroll to be the most suitable person to be queen. The only surprising thing was that the recent development was facilitated by Nightingale. "I had made preparations and knew that this would be the outcome. Yet, seeing them together, why do I feel so painful?" Nightingale grasped Wendy's hand tightly. "I'd resolved about this long ago." Wendy also began to feel bad as she looked at Nightingale's appearance. Her deepest impression of Nightingale was her strength and courage. Whether it was stabbing and capturing her own distant relative in Silver City, or fighting against the church, she was able to keep her cool and fight on despite the difficult circumstances. She even showed no sign of fear while facing the menacing Kara. Yet, on this relationship matter, she once again became a helpless child. And Wendy was unable to provide any help. There's no right or wrong with regard to feelings. All that Wendy could do was to embrace her and pat gently on her shoulders. "If you feel bad, cry it all out and you'll be fine." Nightingale shook her head in disagreement and mumbled. "Since I left the Guyland family, I vowed, never to cry again, never again." Her voice progressively lowered until she became inaudible. Wendy gradually felt a warm and moist feeling in her bosom, but even so, Nightingale did not make a whimper. Because she was restraining herself greatly, her shoulders began to shudder and she held on to Wendy even more forcefully. "I didn't cry." "Yes, you didn't. I know." Wendy closed her eyes and started to regret what she had once said to Nightingale. Staying around His Highness was a simple solution. In fact, the majority of witches would choose to stay around him, because they did not have anywhere else to go. They were also aware that there was only a minimal chance that Roland would accept and marry a girl who could not give birth and thereby could not carry on his bloodline. However, the problem with staying around him was the distance. Just like with the sun, anyone can bask in the warmth and glory of the sunshine, yet it was easy to get burned if one tried to move closer. And Nightingale's intention was obviously not to gaze at him from a distance. This was not an easy road to follow. "How about giving up?" Wendy asked softly. "If you take a step back, you'll still have the sisters to accompany you." The ensuing long silence made time appear to freeze. Wendy felt as though she was awaiting a trial, and even though she was not the defendant, it was still extremely difficult for her to bear. A few times, she almost opened her mouth to ask more questions, but her words would slip back just before she said anything. This continued until Nightingale raised her head. Her eyes appeared slightly red, but tears could not be seen. The wetness on Wendy's bosom seemed to be her own false perception. Seeing the expression in Nightingale's eyes, Wendy could tell that there was a conclusion to this trial, but it was not the end. "I won't give up." Nightingale shook her head and said, "No matter what, I'll stay beside him until the very end." Chapter 480, The Wedding. 3 days later, the wedding of Chief Knight Lannis Carter and Star of the Western Region May was held on castle grounds. Besides family members, there were also members from the Star Flower Troupe, the City Hall and the Witch Union. In this age, a wedding ceremony was always witnessed by the church. Weddings of royal families and the nobility were witnessed by a regional bishop, while nobles and businessmen high priest or priestess. Ordinary citizens needed to go to the church by themselves and pay several silver royals to ask the priest to preside over the wedding. Of course, people who could not afford it just lived together unwed. Since there was no church in the western region, the city hall was the wedding witness. Roland planned for the city hall to dispatch officers to issue marriage certificates and do the registration for free. Carter's wedding would be a great role model. He had already thought of the slogan, convenient, legitimate and free of charge. When the bride appeared in her wedding gown, everyone was impressed. She was not a witch, yet she was a big star, and this drew crowds. Even Roland had to admit that Carter had a good eye. If it were not for the publicity and pleading from the knight, Roland would not have shown the wedding gown. Dressed in his handsome black attire, the bridegroom Carter Lannis looked extraordinary. The two of them standing together were like a heaven-made match. They look so great together. Anna said. We'll have our day eventually. Roland squeezed her hands gently and said, by then, everyone will know you. She smiled sweetly. Marrying a witch was easy, however, getting the recognition of subjects was difficult. It could only be achieved by those with absolute might and great prestige. Hence, the most fundamental thing was to subside the civil war within the kingdom and become the only king of Grey Castle. After that, he could marry Anna. He did not want others to think that Anna was his hidden plaything, like previous nobles. However, Roland believed that it would not be too long. Since the months of demons had finished, the town was fully preparing for the coming spring attack. Soon, there would be a fierce attack and Timothy's throne would be destroyed completely. The rings, please. Next, the officer from the city hall was unfamiliar with the new wedding process written by Roland. He lowered his head to look at his notebook. You may kiss each other now. Wow. Assembled guests broke into a round of applause, especially Irene, a member of the Star Flower Troupe. She excitedly grabbed Morning Light and swayed from side to side, and then grabbed others to clap and cheer for May. Just kissing, Lightning twitched her mouth. Each time my father returned from an expedition, he was kissed several times. Coo, squatting on Lightning's head, Maggie turned her head away. She put her wings in front of her face, however, the eyes of a pigeon are on both sides of the head. Is this wedding procedure really suitable, Your Highness? Scroll put her hands on her forehead. It's a particular case. Not every couple needs to do this, Roland smiled. After all, it's used for publicity, the more attractive, the better. Speaking of this, he turned to Soraya. You need to paint this moment in detail. Rest assured, leave it to me. The latter watched the two newlyweds without blinking. The magic pen in her hands was shining. Carter was obviously nervous. After his initial shock had subsided, May stood on tiptoe and kissed him. Applause broke out in the yard. Please welcome His Highness. He'll give his blessing. Roland left the crowd and joined the newlyweds. He patted Carter's shoulder and said, well done. Then he turned to May. May you be forever happy. That's it? Carter hesitated. Of course. Now go home and rest. I'll give you 2 days off. Roland smiled. Vader should arrive in the town this afternoon. Leave your work to him. Thank you, Your Highness, the newlyweds answered in harmony, smiling at each other. The wedding ended in the sounds of fireworks, which were simulated by echo. In the afternoon, Berev and Carl came to the castle office to report the progress of the 3 supplies project to Roland. So far, the water supply equipment has been installed in all the living quarters and more than half of the heating pipes have been laid, Carl said. He pointed to the town planning map and continued, but the power supply will need more time. Except the factory district under your guidance will complete the installation soon. The 4 residential areas are still in the phase of trenching and slotting. After you went to Longsong Stronghold, this part of the work almost stagnated. Roland nodded and knew they could do nothing about it. No one other than him understood what a circuit was or how electricity operated. Maybe in April, possibly May, all the townspeople would have electric lighting. Roland said, it doesn't matter. Now that the months of demons is over, the heating can wait for some time. Next, the most important thing is the power supply program and the building of Kingdom Main Street. The former concerns the efficiency of time use, and the latter is the key to strengthen the relationship between the two areas once the city building is completed. He continued, in addition, don't dismiss the redundant workers after finishing the construction of Kingdom Main Street. We need them to build the road to the shoal. Do you mean the spot towards the southern mountain area? That's right. It'll be the entrance to the sea, Roland affirmed. After Tilly and her group returned to Sleeping Island, Lotus would come back to the western region. At that time, with the help of Countess Spear, it would take less time to break a new path in mountains. In addition, once the city of Neverwinter is established, these redundant workers will be my subjects and I want to confer citizenship on them as soon as the construction of Kingdom Main Street is finished. He turned to Barav, I'll leave it to you. Yes, my lord. Don't stop the construction of communities. You can expand them to the space between the town and stronghold or the south bank of the Redwater River. The population expansion remains to be a major priority, and I want to triple the urban population by the end of the year. Barav sucked in a breath. My lord, that will be close to 100,000 people. I believe we can afford them in the western region, Roland said with a deep voice, you can take it as your goal. Indeed, the Kingdom of Greycastle had population potential. A big city of 20,000 inhabitants could afford a suburban population of at least 100,000. The more prosperous a city was, the bigger scale the latter was. This phenomenon could also be seen in modern agriculture. There was no limit in the western region, plus since the steam engine had come into use, there was no need to have so many people working on the material supply. Lastly, since electric lighting is now available in the factory district, you'll need to switch to working 8 hours a day in 3 shifts once the city construction is completed, especially the ammunition processing department, the prince said to the supervisor of the city hall. The salary of each shift should be calculated according to the past daily wage. The more they do, the more they get. You can promote it from now on and I hope the factory can operate constantly until we unify Greycastle. Yes, Your Highness. Barav answered and made a bow.